Chapter 943. A few days later, in South Africa, Fong Xingjian stood on a stretch of plains, looked at the military camp in the distance, and said, "It's them." Priest Longmai said, "This is the military camp of N country's first army. The ruler of this independent country is called." There's no need to tell me in so much detail. Fong Xingjian waved his hand, stopping Priest Longmai from explaining further. Fong Xingjian was not interested in the identity of this independent country's ruler. Whether he was a dictator, what was the reason for not handing over the Book of Wisdom, whether there were any conspirators behind this, and which influences were adding fuel to the fire to test his attitude. He merely clenched his fist and raised it toward the sky. In that instant, countless atmospheric and white clouds gathered above the military camp, turning into a huge fist that was several kilometers long. Then, as Fong Xingjian's fist pressed down, the power seethed in the sky, and strong gales gushed forth. Countless warriors cried out in astonishment as they lifted their heads to look, watching as the entire sky came pressing down explosively. There were cries of astonishment, cries, prayers, and all sorts of sounds of bullets and rockets being shot toward the sky. Countless sounds were mixed together. It was like the clamor of hell. In the end, all the clamor turned into a series of dull collisions, and everything returned to silence. The cities within a range of several thousand kilometers all felt an intense tremor. Countless houses within a range of 500 kilometers collapsed, and countless animals cried out agonizingly as they fell into the cracks in the ground. Countless mountains collapsed, and the earth shattered. The entire military camp also disappeared from the ground, leaving behind a huge crack that was over 100 kilometers long and several tens of kilometers wide. It was like an extremely hideous scar, showing off the prowess of that earlier attack. "Let's go." After doing all these, Fong Xingjian turned and disappeared. It was as if he had just gently flicked away the bugs on his body. Priest Longmai looked at this scene in astonishment, unable to calm down for a very long time. He felt even more admiration for Fong Xingjian's cultivation. The news of Fong Xingjian's attack was also spread out very quickly. His vicious means very quickly shocked all the ambitious people, and the various large organizations handed over the Book of Wisdom, allowing Fong Xingjian to obtain 2,303 pages of the Book of Wisdom in one go. This even included the single page that had been kept in secret and was not in the discovery sequence. After obtaining so many books of wisdom, Fong Xingjian could not wait and started to analyze them. At the same time, his main body continued to stay within the sun, using the thunder-inducing technique to keep on strengthening his martial will. Time passed by day. About half a year later, there were still endless disputes on Earth due to the division between the Army's influences and the White Army's inaction. Countless kilometers away from Earth, on the distant sixth planet of the solar system, a group of uninvited guests was welcoming them. The seven-colored light converged into one, turning into a seven-colored disk that slowly descended. What welcomed the disk was the gales on the surface of Saturn moving at an average speed of 500 meters per second and the ultra-low temperature of minus 170 degrees Celsius. The elements in the atmosphere were mainly hydrogen and helium, and a large number of floating ammonia crystals formed dense yellow clouds. This caused Saturn's surface to look like there were many golden ribbons. Strong gales that surpassed the speed of sound struck the disk like countless sharp swords. However, they were still unable to do anything to this seven-colored disk. It was because this disk was formed from the combined powers of the seven commanders' rings. It was constantly being maintained by their wills and the ring's energies, and it had even helped them cross the distant starry sky and arrive on Saturn. It could be said to be a manifestation of the seven commanders' abilities. Within the disk, Edward and the other six commanders stood together, revealing hints of fatigue on their faces. Even they were almost at their limits after crossing over 1 billion kilometers without bringing any resources and moving purely on the ring's energies. After all, even though the ring's energies would recover every day, there was a limit to a person's will. Looking at the tempest on Saturn, the king of trepidation sighed, and there was an indescribable nervousness in his eyes. I really didn't expect that I would be able to come here in my lifetime. Everyone fell silent. None of them had expected that the King of Trepidation would return here and release those two monsters. Edward did not say anything. With a flash of golden light, a golden screen materialized, and a tremendous amount of data, and a map kept on jumping on it. Let's go. I hope that their location hasn't changed too much. At the next moment, the seven-colored disk sank slightly and broke through the strong gales, flying toward the depths of Saturn. In the blink of an eye, it passed through a distance of 1,000 kilometers, broke through the atmosphere, and crashed into an ocean that was formed from liquid hydrogen and liquid helium. There were no signs of life in the ice-cold seawater. It was rare for a batch of intelligent life forms to appear in this ocean that had been alone for several billion years. As Edward and the others continued to get closer to their destination, the temperature of the seawater also became increasingly cold. Occasionally, pieces of floating ice would collide against the disk, shattering into countless ice shards and scattering out into the vast ocean. As the temperature continued to drop, the volume of the ice shards became increasingly larger. Gradually, icebergs that were over 100 meters in length started to collide against the seven-colored disk, but they were shattered into dregs. In the depths of this ice-cold and lonely ocean, as the temperature continued to drop, an ice-sealed battlefield could be seen floating slowly. It was a huge battlefield that spanned over several 10,000 square kilometers. It was also an extremely vast land of ice plains. There were over 100 warriors scattered across the battlefield. However, all of them had turned into ice sculptures, standing quietly in this ice-cold ocean of hydrogen and helium. They were either launching punches, dodging, or defending. Their actions were lively, and their auras were majestic. It was as if they were still in the midst of battle, able to move at any moment. It could be seen that these warriors had been split into two groups and were attacking each other. They were the Silver Army and the Cyan Army that had fought here back then. The battle between these two groups could sink the land and destroy the ecosystem. The Cyan Army did not care about this, but the other armies were unable to accept this. Therefore, they joined forces and lured the Cyan Army to Saturn. However, other than the Cyan Army, the Silver Army was also the target of everyone's ceiling. Umitba, Reverend Fahue looked at the Silver Army's warriors who had been frozen along the way, and a bitter expression appeared on his face. Although these warriors were strong enough, after being sealed in ice for so many years, both their physical bodies and wills had died a long time ago. The Cyan Army's warriors were just a bunch of lunatics, and their deaths were not to be regretted. However, each and every one of the Silver Army's warriors had righteousness in their hearts, serving the country. They could be called heroes. Although their ideals were different, Reverend Fahue still felt that it was a great pity for them to die. Flying across the ice-cold land, the seven of them headed toward the center of the battlefield. The seven-colored disk landed slowly on this stretch of frozen land. At the next moment, it suddenly shattered and dissipated, revealing Edward and the other six figures. Chapter 944. It's up ahead, Edward said with a grim countenance. I hope everything goes smoothly. Over 10 years ago, as the two strongest influences on Earth, the Cyan Army and the Silver Army had a decisive battle here. The other 11 armies wanted to take this opportunity to wipe out the two armies in one fell swoop, completely removing them from Earth. They had succeeded and also failed. They had made the two armies disappear from Earth for over 10 years and dismembered all the mortal forces the two armies had on Earth. However, they had not really succeeded either. It was because neither the Cyan Army's leader nor the Silver Army's leader had really died back then. They had merely been trapped. The King of Trepidation's eyelids trembled a little, and the yellow energy encompassing him seemed to flicker a little. As the King of Trepidation and the leader of the Yellow Army, he felt an irrepressible terror gushing out from his heart. Are we really going to let him out? Shouldn't we reconsider? Ziling was killed by Fang Xingjian. Until now, we still haven't thought of a way to seal them up again. Everyone else present could understand the King of Trepidation's worries. It was because, out of the 7 commanders, his relationship with Silver was the worst. After all, his concept of spreading terror was completely at odds with Silver's justice. However, now that things had come to this, what else could they do? They had spent half a year to come to Saturn. What they had lost was not just time. Right now, they could imagine that all of their businesses on Earth had probably been broken up. For example, the King of Trepidation needed to spread terror to raise his strength, while Hui needed to control influences and society to fulfill the requirements of his sexual orientation. All of them felt that their powers were deteriorating. The ring's energies that they could control were getting increasingly lesser by the day. From the moment they decided to come to Saturn, there was no way out for them. The 7 of them walked on the ice land, and the 7 colored rings' energies encompassed their bodies, forming many battle suits that protected them from the extremely low temperature in the surroundings. After walking for about 300 meters or so, they arrived before a huge ice mountain. The mountain's height was over 10,000 meters. If it were on Earth, it would be the New World's highest peak. Based on Edward's and the others' memories, Cyan and Silver had been sealed in ice in this mountain. Over 10 years ago, the 2 of them had fought in Saturn's ocean of hydrogen and helium. At the most crucial moment of that battle, the other 11 commanders had taken action together. They had not intended to kill the 2 of them, but had used the power of the purple spirit as a base to make the 2 of them fall in love with each other. Using the power of the 11 commanders as the foundation, with the purple spirit's power as the main attack, taking advantage of the fact that the 2 of them were holding each other back, they broke into the spiritual world of the 2. In the minds of Edward and the others, the 2 of them represented complete opposites. Once they fell in love, there would be a conflict between their temperaments, and it was very likely that the energy of their rings would be destroyed. Unfortunately, Silver's cultivation was beyond the imagination of Edward and the others. At the last moment, he sealed his emotions in ice. While he was freezing his emotions, Qing took the opportunity to attack him and seal all of his desires. The 2 of them attacked each other on the mental level. Silver's emotions and desires were sealed, and as the emotions in his heart were sealed one by one, in order to stop Qing from dragging him out, he turned the area within a radius of several hundred kilometers into frost, sealing him, Qing, and the 2 armies together. The 2 of them attacked each other. No matter how disadvantaged they were, they did not forget to dig holes for each other. The result could be said to be mutual destruction. However, such seals were actually very weak. Once they were stimulated by the outside world, they would be awakened very quickly. Therefore, all these years, they had avoided mentioning Silver's and Qing's names in order to prevent them from awakening. The reason they had come to Saturn was to help Silver suppress Qing during the process of unsealing. After all, if they had to free one person, they naturally hoped that it would be Silver who could communicate with them. After all, Qing's chaos and chaos made it impossible for him to communicate. He was a pure lunatic. Edward looked at the huge ice mountain and said, "Get ready. Let's attack into Silver's spiritual world together and help him suppress Qing's attacks." They were evenly matched to begin with, and our participation is like the last straw. Everyone held their breaths, and streams of rings' energies rose up, bringing along a portion of their wills and darting toward the depths of the ice mountain. However, just as they were about to do this, everyone's actions suddenly came to a stop. The 7 of them looked at the ice mountain before them in astonishment. They saw a black figure continuously enlarging in size. "There's someone inside?" Hui said in surprise. "He's coming out." As the figure continued to enlarge, the contours of his limbs, chest, abdomen, and head became increasingly clearer. It was as if he would leap out from the ice mountain at any moment. "He's coming," Edward said solemnly. "How is that possible? He should still be in the seal. Who on earth is he?" In that instant, the 7 of them were on their guard to the extreme. Violent rings' energies burst out from their bodies, and 7 streams of light pierced the ocean like 7 huge fireballs sinking into the bottom of the sea. The surrounding ice layers cracked crazily, and a large number of bubbles rose up. The entire ice mountain started to tremble. At the next moment, under the 7 people's astonished gazes, the figure turned into the size of a normal person. It was as if he was stuck to the surface of the ice mountain. Then with a smack, he stepped out. It was a silver-haired and silver-eyed young man. There seemed to be only coldness left in the young man's silver eyes. He stood steadily in the seawater like a stabilizing force. With his appearance, the entire world seemed to have calmed down. The tremors caused by the explosion of the 7 gushes of powers from earlier all disappeared. The ice mountain regained its calmness, and the ice plains under his feet showed no signs of cracking or melting. There was a calming force in his eyes. It was as if as long as he was around, the world would continue to operate according to the rules, and humans would continue to live according to the rules. When a young man's gaze swept past the 7 of them, Edward and the others could not help but have this feeling rise in their minds. To think that he has already broken through the seal? Edward cried out inwardly, "How can this be?" But if he has broken through the seal long ago, then an uncontrollable curiosity rose in Edward's heart. The Gold Army's persistence toward the truth and the unknown allowed him to break through the other party's astonishment. He lifted his head and asked, "When did you break through the seal?" "Break through the seal?" The silver-haired young man's voice rang out in the 7 people's minds. "Are you talking about being sealed in ice? I was able to enter and leave this place freely about 7 years ago." Hearing the other party's reply, Edward and the others were even more astonished. Edward could not help but ask, "Then why didn't you return to Earth?" Chapter 945. Why did he not return to Earth? This was also the question and doubt in everyone's hearts. Hearing Edward's question, the silver-haired young man lowered his head, looked at the ice plains under his feet, and said calmly, 10 years ago, I regained my ability to think. I quietly accumulated my powers in this ice-cold ocean of hydrogen and helium on this uninhabited planet, slowly whittling away Howell's life. Howell was the Cyan Army's commander, an expert who had been sealed in ice together with silver. 7 years ago, I finally wiped out Howell's will and physical body completely, causing him to disappear from this world forever. The silver-haired young man continued. However, my emotions were also accumulated to an extreme point due to being sealed in ice for a long period of time. They were like volcanoes. If I were to recover my emotions directly, the long period of emotional blankness would cause me, who had suddenly gained emotions, to become irritable, easily angered, and fickle. I might destroy the entire world because of this. Therefore, in the time that followed, I tried to recover my emotions bit by bit, whittling away the uncontrollable part of me. However, it was much harder than I had imagined, the silver-haired young man said, shaking his head. It was then that I realized that even though I could flatten the entire world with a wave of my hand, I was still unable to casually kill off my thoughts. Therefore, I tried to control my raging emotions and trim them carefully, preventing the damage they could cause to Earth. And the method was to think. I thought about the world's circulation and the nature of life time and time again. 5 years ago, I started to be able to see the waves in space, the pressure of gravity, the folds of the world. 3 years ago, I was able to see some images of the future. I saw the world's origin, and I seemed to have seen my own destruction. 1 year ago, I sensed evil from a distant space-time and tried to stop them from coming to this universe. Until now, when you guys returned to Saturn. The silver-haired young man looked at Edward and asked with an indifferent tone, "What happened?" I sensed that a great change was about to take place on Earth. Urbian. Edward said the other party's name softly. Right now, Urbian's eyes were filled with an unfathomable terror. The feeling the other party gave him right now was not that of a human. Instead, it was like a black hole engulfing all thoughts, waves, and light that attempted to probe him. He said, "We've been attacked." As he spoke, he told them everything about Feng Xingjian. Finally, he added, "Feng Xingjian is too powerful, and he has no principles at all. He wantonly slaughters on Earth, threatening the stability of the entire planet. Urbian, we need your help." Urbian didn't say anything. He just raised his hand and looked at the silver sword in his hand. An incomparably vast, like the galaxy in the sky, delved into it and looked at it. At the sight of this, the countenance of the Green Army's Ming Wang changed drastically. It was because he had no idea when Erbian had taken the Thunder Calamity Sword from his hand. The others looked at each other, and there seemed to be some regret in their eyes. What kind of assistance are we looking for? Meanwhile, Erbian's will had already retreated from the Thunder Calamity in that instant. The silver longsword was once again in Ming Wang's hand, causing Ming Wang's expression to darken and turn extremely ugly. He should have been the one who forged this sword. Erbian said calmly, "It's true that he's stronger than you guys. If I were to kill him, I need about 96 seconds. Let's go. It's true that we can't allow him to destroy Earth. The world's order needs to be reestablished." As Erbian spoke, he waved his hand, and everyone present flashed and appeared several 100,000 kilometers away. Edward's countenance changed. Reverse curvature, superluminal speed. He raised his head and looked at the starlight and the surroundings being dragged into many long lines, and the astonishment on his face grew. He's already able to distort space, to move at superluminal speed. Edward looked at Erbian, and his heart grew increasingly heavy. How much has he grown? Was it right or wrong for us to seek Erbian's assistance this time around? However, he didn't kill the King of Trepidation immediately. Does this mean that his sense of justice is no longer as prejudiced as it was over 10 years ago? Just then, Edward's gaze, which was sweeping across the surroundings, suddenly narrowed. Wait a minute. Why are there only 7 people left? Where's the King of Trepidation? Edward felt as if all his hairs were standing up. However, no matter how he looked around, he could not find the King of Trepidation. The King of Trepidation had disappeared unknowingly. Other than Edward, the other commanders in the surroundings did not seem to have noticed this. Just as Edward was astonished by this strange change, he looked toward Erbian, wanting to ask him something. However, when he turned his gaze over, he discovered that Erbian had unknowingly looked toward him. A hint of a strange smile appeared on Erbian's face. For some reason, Edward felt that Erbian's face was extremely pale, just like that of a dead person. On Earth, Fang Xingjian's heart suddenly throbbed. He lifted his head, and the gleam in his eyes burst out. It was as if his eyes had pierced through layers of void space and were looking in the direction of Saturn. Fang Xingjian stood up slowly, and the entire sacred white crevice kept on trembling. It was as if there was some power that wanted to break through the entire space. After cultivating in seclusion for half a year, Fang Xingjian's current abilities had become increasingly terrifying. A total of 2,333 pages of the Book of Wisdom had been analyzed, and Fang Xingjian's understanding of the entire world had also reached a new level. His instant sword was just one step away from achieving a qualitative breakthrough. His heart sword path had also improved tremendously through his experiments on the various army's warriors. Even the immortal child's emotions would be slightly affected when he was before him. Did you sense it? The immortal child's body appeared next to Fang Xingjian and said, "What a strong, evil intent." Fang Xingjian said, "I need to enter seclusion for a period of time to fully focus on comprehending the final stage." The immortal child fell silent for a moment before saying, "Although Saturn is over 1 billion kilometers away from us, with that person's abilities, we can't eliminate the possibility that he has means to move at light speed or even superluminal teleportation. He might have arrived on Earth while you're in seclusion." The immortal child's gaze sank as he said, "If you're going to enter seclusion, you must find a place where he can't find you." Fang Xingjian nodded. He was not worried that the other party would arrive on Earth while he was in seclusion. After all, he did not have any trusted aides on Earth. The only thing he had to worry about was not letting the other party find him while he was in seclusion. However, the immortal child still said, "Are you sure you want to enter seclusion? How confident are you in attaining a breakthrough?" The immortal child still felt that it was a little risky to enter seclusion at this moment. Fang Xingjian looked at his palm and sensed waves of sword intense seething in his body. It was as if the half a year of cultivation had suppressed them to an extreme. Just a little bit more, and my sword arts will be able to attain another breakthrough. Chapter 946. Hearing Fang Xingjian's words, the immortal child's heart skipped a beat. Over the past half a year, Fang Xingjian was not the only one who had been improving. The immortal child was also cultivating in seclusion, sorting out what he had learned in the past. The Holy Sea of Truth had a great background and countless legacies. There were too many things that were suitable for him to cultivate, and he was also very clear about the path after Tier 6 of the divine level. Many of the knowledge in the microscopic world was also in Miracle World's version. Therefore, he was improving almost at every moment. However, after half a year, he had merely digested the powers and knowledge he had obtained from attaining a breakthrough to the divine level. Although he had been getting stronger, to make another breakthrough on the basis of absorbing his past improvements, he looked at Fang Xingjian, nodded, and said, "It's good that you're confident. If you can really attain a breakthrough, it'll be more beneficial to our plan this time around." With that, his body slowly shattered and gradually disappeared. "Then I'll be waiting for you to come out of seclusion for the time being." After deciding on his future strategy with the immortal child, Fang Xingjian left the sacred white crevice and charged out of the atmospheric layer with a move. Going into seclusion at full force was not just to use all of his energy on the instant sword and the derivation of his heartsword path. Fang Xingjian also planned to withdraw all of his powers and focus fully on attaining a breakthrough. The path of martial arts had always been one of advancing boldly and vigorously. Now that he was going into seclusion to attain a breakthrough, Fang Xingjian naturally planned to give it his all. He had long since decided where he would go into seclusion. It would be the center of the solar system, the place where 99% of his powers were gathered, the sun's interior. One reason was because there was a tremendous amount of energy that he could draw from at any time. The other reason was because of the star's vastness. The sun's volume was over 100,000 times that of Earth. What kind of concept was that? Even if Fang Xingjian wanted to search for a target on 100,000 Earths, it would take him many years. Moreover, the electromagnetic waves and heat energy in the sun's interior were extremely chaotic, making it even more difficult to search for a target. Even if the other party was stronger, wanting to search for Fang Xingjian, who was in seclusion in the sun, would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. It would be almost impossible for them to find a substance that was less than 1 cubic meter in such a place. Therefore, no matter what the other party's strategy was, they would have to wait for Fang Xingjian to come out of seclusion before they could take action. This would allow Fang Xingjian to be fully prepared. 8 minutes later, Fang Xingjian arrived inside the sun. All of his powers and will merged into one in that instantly. Fang Xingjian could sense waves of seething power in his body. It was as if the mountains and rivers were roaring and stars explode. Fang Xingjian's Xian Fang. Fang Xingjian's Fang Xingjian. Martial will, Xian Fan had. Fang Xian over. After half a year, the cultivation, martial Fang had training, the Fang son, Sun A, Fang Xingjian's martial, Fang with Xingar realm. After reaching 8,000 points in his martial will, he would only be able to increase by 1 point almost every over 10 days. Moreover, the speed was getting increasingly slower. Clearly, he had reached a bottleneck. However, a martial will of 8,000 points was already terrifying enough. It could be said that toppling mountains and overturning seas with a flip of his hand was nothing much. He could even move the tectonic plates of continents and change the direction of the geographical veins. However, no matter how strong his powers were, there would be a limit to the increment in his battle prowess if his realm was not high enough. He would still not be able to win against Tier 6 or even 7 divine level experts. Therefore, this was why Fang Xingjian wanted to achieve another breakthrough in the instant sword, bringing forth new ideas in the celestial eradication sword technique. Amidst the endless high-temperature flames, Fang Xingjian sat cross-legged. Countless data, formulas, and information kept on jumping out his mind. At the next moment, a black dot took form before him. As the small black dot moved, the surrounding space was compressed. Light rays and flames gradually became distorted, forming an invisible longsword. The infiltrating void sword uses the Earth's astral powers as its foundation. At the next second, streams of lightning flashed, and the fireways within a range of 1,000 leagues were split apart by an invisible force. It was as if they had been swept by a sharp sword. The all-conquering sword activates the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces to circulate. There's nothing it can't cut through and nothing it can't slash through. A breath later, the sea of flames closed up once again, and a myriad of sword light suddenly burst out from Fang Xingjian's body. It was as if a sun had risen up, emitting an extremely piercing glow that caused the surrounding solar sea of flames to appear dark. At the next moment, the light and shadows changed. It was as if countless swordsmen could be seen performing sword arts amidst the solar sea of flames. Each and every move was capable of shattering the world. It was as if there were really countless divine-level experts engaged in a great battle. The light pursuit sword integrates the profoundness of the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces, the Earth's astral powers and nuclear powers. Not only can it kill enemies with sword light, but it can also control electromagnetic signals, change the five senses, and form illusory arts. At the next moment, the myriad of sword light disappeared, and the entire sea of flames seemed to have regained its peace. However, the peace did not last for too long. Suddenly, streams of black sword marks appeared in void space, slashing through the flames, heat, energy, and light rays. It was as if a corner of space had suddenly disappeared. The instant sword requires a strong grasp of the heavenly thunders and terrestrial magnetism forces, the Earth's astral powers, nuclear powers, and the forces that cause all living things to decay. In the past, I was still a little lacking. However, with the knowledge I've obtained from the Book of Wisdom and my martial will at 8,000 points, I can attempt to attain a breakthrough. At the thought of this, Fang Xingjian's gaze narrowed. In that instant, all the flames within a range of 100 leagues came to a standstill. They were like frozen ice sculptures, not moving at all. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. While Fang Xingjian was cultivating in seclusion in the sun to comprehend the instant sword, 1 hour after he left Earth, Erbian, who had been compressing space and moving at superluminal speed, had arrived on Earth. Standing outside the atmospheric layer and looking down at the blue planet under his feet, Erbian revealed a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. This was Earth, his hometown, the place of origin that he had left for a very long time. With a slight thought, an extremely powerful electromagnetic wave burst out from his mind, sweeping across the entire Earth at the speed of light. Of course, it was impossible for him to process all the details of Earth, down to the atomic information, with a single thought. However, he could sense that many battles were erupting. Sensing the chaos on Earth, Erbian's countenance sank. "Where's Fang Xingjian?" Fang Xingjian asked directly. Erbian had always done things in a simple and straightforward manner. After arriving on Earth, he planned on solving the problem directly. He should still be in the sacred White Crevice. The White Army's sacred White Crevice is probably near the Tiegai mountain pass in the western section of the Kunlun Mountains. Erbian nodded. At the next moment, everyone turned into a meteor and landed in the sky above the Kunlun Mountains. Chapter 9:47. Looking at the vast snowy mountains before them, Hui said, "The sacred White Crevice was created by the White Army's first commander. It's an additional space that is independent from this universe. If one wishes to enter, they'll have to find the entrance they set up. However, their entrance will change every once in a while, and it has always been a top secret. However, we can follow the people who go out to purchase goods and think of a way to find the entrance." Just as he was explaining how to enter the sacred White Crevice, Erbian put out his palm and tore it gently. The space before them was like a white canvas being torn apart, revealing the canvas beneath it. It was a pure white world. At the sight of this scene, the hearts of the other 6 commanders skipped a beat. Tearing space apart? Edward shook his head. No, it's not tearing. It seems to be transforming and shifting, stacking the 2 spaces together. This way, we'll be able to enter the sacred white crevice directly. Edward was the only one present who could see this. After all, at the level of having grasped space, Urbian's actions were already hard for the other commanders to understand. However, regardless of whether they understood or not, everyone present once again sensed how powerful Urbian was. The latter seemed as if he did not feel anything. With a single step, he entered the sacred white crevice. The other commanders looked at each other and walked in one after another. In the end, when it was Grade's turn, he intentionally lagged behind by a step. He sent out an invisible physical aura from his fingertip, darting into the ground and disappearing. Urbian, this guy's strength is too terrifying. After he deals with Fang Xingjian, it'll probably be our turn. If that's the case, I'll have to make my preparations in advance. At the thought of this, his countenance sank. He took a step forward and entered the sacred white crevice as well. Arriving in the pure white world of the sacred white crevice, Urbian lifted his head and looked around. The secrets of the entire space seemed to have appeared before his eyes. Amazing, to be able to create another space and rebuild another world. Although it's still not perfect, the first commander of the White Army is probably just a step away from coming into contact with my current realm, as expected of someone who fended off the first onslaught. Urbian's words sounded extremely arrogant, but in the ears of the crowd, it was only natural. It could be said that if anyone else on Earth were to say these words, they would be arrogant and ignorant. Only when Urbian said these words, it would be in an upright manner. It was because in the memories of Edward and the others, none of the commanders in the 13 armies' history had reached Urbian's current realm. No one had ever done it before, and no one would be able to do it in the future. This sentence suddenly popped up in Edward's mind. At the same time, Urbian also moved. He spread out his 5 fingers and swiped his palm in the direction of the world before him. It was as if his hand was brushing across a canvas. Wherever his palm passed, the originally pure white world seemed to be dyed with a layer of color. The mountains, rivers, birds, beasts, and flowers had all turned from pure white to having their own colors, appearing extremely lively. It was as if the original canvas had turned into a real world. How'd he do this? Reverend Fahaway looked at this scene in astonishment. He knew that everything in the sacred white crevice had been materialized from the white ring's energy. However, he could no longer understand how Urbian had turned all of these into reality. The other commanders were also extremely astonished. As for the White Army's warriors who were staying in the sacred white crevice, they were alarmed at the very first moment. As streams of white light pillars soared into the sky, several tens of the White Army's warriors flew into the sky. All of them looked at the tremendous changes in the world in astonishment, unable to understand what was happening. However, Urbian did not stop. After dyeing the entire sacred white crevice with color, he also raised his other hand and grabbed out fiercely. With this grabbing action, the entire sacred white crevice trembled. It was as if Urbian's palm had grabbed the entire space. Caught it. With a soft bellow, Urbian's hands, which were grabbing out its space, slowly put together. As he did this, everything in the world trembled intensely. Even Edward and the other commanders felt an intense pressure. It was as if the entire world was pressing down on them, and every single particle in their bodies was suffering from intense pressure. Priest Longmai, Priest Tai, and the other members of the White Army's upper echelon all felt an intense sense of danger. What's going on? Who's attacking the sacred white crevice? Run. Some people fled toward the outside world. Some attempted to find the source of the attack, and some even unleashed their powers in an attempt to resist the omnipresent pressure. However, it was too late. As Urbian's hands accelerated abruptly, the entire sacred white crevice's small world seemed to have turned into a canvas. With a grab and pull, the canvas shrank rapidly toward his hands. In the blink of an eye, the entire sacred white crevice was like a canvas covering the real world. With a pull, Urbian kept it in his palm. Meanwhile, Urbian, Edward, and the others had already returned to the real world. A ball of white light kept on flashing on Urbian's palm. If one were to take a closer look, they would be able to see countless plants, bamboo, and rocks, as well as the stunned expressions of the White Army's warriors. Edward stared at the light circle in Urbian's hand and shouted, "What did you do? How did you do that?" The scene just now had far exceeded his understanding of the world. In his eyes, it was completely like magic. Urbian looked at the sacred white crevice in his hand and said calmly, "It's like holding an oil painting on a table tightly in one's hand. It's about the same action." Ignoring the other commander's astonishment, Urbian shook the sacred white crevice in his hand and said, "That Fang Xinjian isn't inside. He's not here." He said, "Then he might be at another base. We can release the warriors in the sacred white crevice, especially Long Mai. He should know where Fang Xinjian is." "I've asked him. He doesn't know." The image of the small world in his hand appeared in Urbian's mind, and he said calmly, "But it's fine. I want to reorganize the various factions on Earth. If he comes out to obstruct me, I'll just kill him. If he doesn't come out to obstruct me, I won't deliberately target him either. Although he's strong, in my eyes, he's not much different from an ordinary commoner. There's no need to give him special treatment." Chapter 948. Everyone present agreed with Urbian's words. At his level of strength, it was true that he did not need to care about a mere Fang Xinjian. It was the same for He, Edward, and the others. Right now, Fang Xinjian's matter was no longer important. What was important was Urbian's attitude. In order to deal with a monster, they had released an even more terrifying monster. However, there was no use in feeling regretful. The problem was that Urbian wanted to reform Earth. God knew what kind of things he would do with his character. The entire Earth would probably welcome a tremendous change. Their thoughts were not wrong, but they had still underestimated Urbian's current battle prowess. Right now, both Urbian's strength and knowledge were as deep as the ocean. After over 10 years of dedicated cultivation, he had integrated into space and controlled it. His battle prowess had reached an unbelievable level, and he was comparable to a Tier 6 divine level expert in Miracle World. Urbian casually tossed the sacred white crevice to Edward. Edward caught it in a panic and discovered that this lump of white light was as light as air. It was as if it did not have any mass at all. Urbian raised his hand gently, and everyone flew up into the sky with a swoosh. In the blink of an eye, they broke through the atmospheric layer and arrived in outer space. Under their feet, the blue planet rotated slowly, and they could clearly see the distribution of the continents and oceans. What is he trying to do? Is he trying to kill all the riders in one go? Justice, justice. This guy's justice is hell to some people. Just as the 6 commanders were guessing what Urbian was going to do, they heard his voice ringing out in their minds. Because humans live in different environments, different regions, different languages, and different cultures, there are different kinds of conflicts. Today, I want books to be of the same language, cars to be on the same track, and people to be of the same mind. As Urbian spoke, he opened his mouth slightly, and streams of silver energy gushed out from his body. They were like clouds and fog that encompassed the planet under his feet. As more and more silver fog descended from the sky, Urbian's body seemed to start melting as well. In the end, he also turned into a part of the fog and descended into the mortal world. At this moment, Urbian released all of his power. At Urbian's current realm, the shape and size of his body no longer had any meaning. He could maintain his human form or transform into all sorts of strange things with a single thought. Having a thorough understanding of the microscopic world, he could already simulate 99% of the natural phenomena in the universe. At this level, he could be said to be omnipotent to mortals. Once a Tier 6 divine level expert like this started a battle, their energy and will would dissipate, and there would be no so-called physical body. It was just like Fang Xinjian's clones. Any one of them could be a clone, and any one of them could also be the physical body. It was because they were all a part of his body to begin with. For example, when Urbian turned into a cloud and enveloped the atmosphere, it was a direct effect of power on the microscopic level. It was equivalent to his entire body melting into space. His existence itself was no longer a life form. but a phenomenon. The six commanders could sense that immense power spreading out in the world. It was boundless and boundless, and all of them were shocked by the power before them. The immortal child, who was hiding in the depths of the earth, could sense it even more deeply. Spatial translocation, merging into space and reaching the ends of the microscopic world. This is a standard Tier 6 divine level expert. Sighing inwardly, the immortal child's countenance turned increasingly grim. It was because he knew that at this level, if one wished to kill the other party, they would have to kill and deplete all of the other party's energy. It was because the other party no longer had a conjured physique to restrain them. Right now, Urbian could be a gust of wind, a gust of fire, a bolt of lightning, a drop of rainwater that fell from the nine heavens, a fish in the depths of the ocean, a thought in the minds of a crowd, or a wave in a radio signal. At this realm, experts would exist as long as their power and will existed. There was no fixed pattern to their physical forms. However, most people were still used to maintaining their human form. After all, as long as they were in human society, the human form would always be the most convenient. Although they could take on many forms, when it came to battle, different people would naturally have different strongest forms. In Miracle World, this form was known as the virtual image. Condensing the virtual image and adding all sorts of powerful abilities to the virtual image through incessant cultivation and research was the main battle prowess of experts at this stage. The virtual image was the product of the cultivators' continuous cultivation and integration of their newest knowledge. Due to the differences in culture, background, experiences, or legacies, the virtual image condensed by each person would have different appearances and abilities. In ordinary battles, Tier 6 divine level experts will be able to defeat any enemies below this realm just by relying on spatial translocation. Once they went all out, they would have to release their virtual image to fight against their enemies. For example, although Urbian did not have Miracle World's martial arts system, he had still comprehended the method to unleash his full powers. Right now, in order to change the earth, he used his strongest form, the heavenly river. With a rumble, accompanied by an explosion that resounded throughout the world, the overwhelming silver mist had already turned into a river that filled the sky. The silver river water was like the legendary Milky Way, surging and flowing in the sky. No one knew how much water it contained. At this moment, countless people on Earth stopped what they were doing. Regardless of whether they were working, playing, fighting, or taking examinations, almost everyone looked toward the sky, revealing astonished expressions as they looked at the silvery heavenly river that was gushing forth. At the next moment, the silver heavenly river in the sky paused for a moment before charging down toward the ground. The billowing heavenly river descended from the sky, and its majestic aura was extremely astonishing. It was as if it wanted to drown the entire world in this silver ocean. Countless agonizing cries and astonished cries rang out. Looking at the boundless silver river that filled up the sky, everyone was unable to summon any strength to resist. Only endless despair lingered in their hearts. This was a natural disaster that could destroy the entire human world. At the next moment, the heavenly river collided into the ground. Just as everyone thought that they would be engulfed by the endless waves, they discovered that wherever the heavenly river passed by, everything would disappear. There was no collision as they had imagined. There was only disappearance. The endless heavenly river first landed on the East Asian continent. Wherever it passed by, regardless of whether it was people, buildings, cars, or even mountains, rivers, and continents, everything disappeared. Chapter 949. As the commanders, Edward and the others stood in the air and could see clearly that the heavenly river was seething. It was like a white line brushing past the East Asian continent. Wherever it passed by, the East Asian continent would start to disappear. In the direction of the Pacific Ocean, the land that had disappeared started to appear. The entire process seemed as if the entire land had been moved across space. The immortal child, who was hiding in the dark, was astonished. He observed the heavenly river that Urbian had released in detail and thought, "Is this his virtual image? Its size can encompass half a planet, and its powers are astonishing. It even contains the ability to spatial translocation. The immortal child was one of the 3 strongest experts in the holy sea of truth, after all. He was very knowledgeable and had a clear understanding of the realms of powers. Therefore, he was able to see through Urbian's virtual image ability very quickly. This heavenly river that connected through almost the entire atmosphere had the strongest ability to spatial translocation. It was like a super huge spatial door. Any matter that came into contact with the heavenly river could be teleported to any location on the heavenly river. It was just like how the many heavenly rivers had swept past the East Asian continent. The parts that they had swept past were teleported to the other end of the heavenly river, which was located on the Pacific Ocean. The other party was moving the land. However, after knowing the other party's virtual image ability, the immortal child's countenance turned even more grim. It just has to be this ability. This is going to be troublesome. On the other side, the entire Earth was stunned by the amazing scene before them. A young married lady looked at the world that was being engulfed by the seething heavenly river in a daze. Wherever the silver sea passed by, the tall buildings and streets would disappear one after another. It was as if they had been engulfed into an endless black hole. In the end, the silver water splashed before her, and she could only watch as her body was engulfed. First, it was her calves, then her thighs, waist, and chest. Her body disappeared layer by layer. The young married lady looked at her empty lower body and let out a scream. At the next moment, the silver sea completely engulfed her body. She only felt her vision darken before it lit up again. Her body appeared once again, and what appeared before her was the city that had disappeared earlier. The continent, the skyscrapers, the cars, and the people were all intact. It was as if the shipwreck that had happened before was just an illusion. However, when the young woman turned around, she saw a boundless ocean behind her. Countless skyscrapers, cars, and people appeared out of thin air, and the city was like a painting spread out on the surface of the ocean. She even saw the car that was originally driving on the road appear out of thin air. At first, only the wheels were running, then half of the car was running, and then the whole car appeared. The driver driving on the road still had a look of horror on his face. Similar scenes gradually occurred across the entire Earth. The 6 commanders looked at the Earth beneath their feet. All the continents and islands were arranged with the Pacific Ocean as the center. Urbian was moving all the continents of the Earth together. He wanted everyone to live on one continent. However, as someone who had managed several countries before, we knew very well how complicated the situation would be once there were more people. Moving such a huge amount of things might seem very easy, but if someone were to get frightened, fall down, or panic among the people, there might even be people undergoing surgeries, or there might be drivers who got in accidents due to panic. All these things could happen. It was impossible for Urbian not to know about all these. Just as he was thinking of this, Reverend Fahue could not help but say toward void space, Urbian, such a violent movement might cause a large number of civilians to panic and suffer casualties. Why don't we slow down a little? Urbian's voice rang out in everyone's minds. Clearly, Hizzle was still monitoring this place. Everything is a necessary sacrifice. Mortals are too foolish. If they are allowed to develop on their own, they'll only end up walking towards self-destruction. At such a time, we can only use violence to force them to head toward the right path. Once we stop, they'll start doing all sorts of foolish struggles and resistance. On the ground, even though Urbian was extremely powerful and possessed world-shaking remarkable abilities, he was still unable to control the hearts of people. In the process of moving the land, a large number of accidents still occurred. Frightened animals and panic-stricken people caused all sorts of disturbances, explosions, and fires. There were even people who attacked others as if they were venting their emotions. All sorts of robberies, shootings, and brawls kept on happening. Urbian looked at all of this with indifference in his eyes. It was as if he was a god high up in the world, watching the struggles of mortals. Over 10 years have passed. Technology has advanced, and society has prospered. However, the stupidity of humans hasn't changed at all. Urbian sighed. Streams of heavenly rivers connected the world from the south and north, gushing out toward the north and south poles. It was because as he moved the land, the astromagnetic field underwent an intense change. He had to stop these changes to prevent the environment that humans lived in from changing drastically. Over the next 3 days, the entire astral land was moved together by Urbian, eventually turning into a circular piece of land. Not only did it fill up the original Pacific Ocean, but it also kept on expanding out toward the east and west, forming an extremely vast piece of land. However, on the land, the locations of all the cities, countries, mountain ranges, and rivers had gone through tremendous changes. It could be said that the world had been turned upside down. All the governments were almost paralyzed, and a large amount of electronic equipment could not be used due to the sudden change in the terrain. At the same time that the land was being moved, endless heavenly rivers gushed into the underground, engulfing and releasing all sorts of underground rock strata, maintaining the stability of the Earth's center of gravity, gravitational force, and magnetic field. During these 3 days, the 6 commanders stood in void space and watched the entire Earth's changes. Right now, they could no longer summon any will to resist. It was because the powers that Urbian displayed had completely surpassed their imaginations. Just then, Urbian's voice rang out in their minds once again. Come, the new Earth still needs you guys and the Army's warriors to manage it. Assist me and bring the Earth into an unprecedented paradise. 1 month later, inside the sun, Feng Xingjian suddenly opened his eyes, and 2 streams of bright light shot out explosively from them. A stream of sword intent soared into the sky, tearing apart the sea of flames in the blink of an eye and shooting out toward the universe's void space. Streams of fire snakes that were several 10,000 meters long burst out from the sun's corona. Flames that could incinerate the entire Himalayas on Earth soared into the sky. These flames were pushed out toward the universe's space by waves of invisible forces. They were like panicked animals that were escaping from some terrifying existence. Behind the darting flames, a vacuum passageway extended out from the sun's interior. Wherever it passed by, all the heat and flames would be split into 2, cutting out a vacuum passageway. Feng Xingjian walked out from the corridor step by step. His entire body exuded a vast and illusory aura. I've finally succeeded. Chapter 950. Right now, outside the sun, Feng Xingjian had gone through a month of seclusion to polish his sword arts. He had finally achieved a qualitative breakthrough in the instant sword, and his grasp of space-time had improved to a higher level. This was not all. Due to the qualitative change in the instant sword, the Celestial Eradication Sword Formation, which used the Celestial Eradication Sword technique as its foundation, had also achieved a breakthrough and reached a higher level. After achieving a breakthrough in his sword arts, his next target was Urbian on Earth. As long as he defeated this person, he and the immortal child would be able to break through the barrier and return to Miracle World. They would officially become Tier 6 divine level experts, truly transcending beyond the mortal world and become a top-notch power in the world. At the thought of this, Feng Xingjian turned and looked in the direction of Earth. At the next moment, he disappeared without a trace with a flash. On the other hand, a month had passed on Earth, and human society had undergone earth-shaking changes. The commanders and warriors of the 13 armies that remained on Earth possessed all sorts of strange abilities. They could even materialize using the ring's energy. Other than their battle prowess, they also represented great productivity. It was just that in the past, the armies and warriors were lofty existences. Even the country's president could not command them as they wished. However, right now, Urbian ruled over the world with absolute power, suppressing the world. No one or any influence in the world dared to defy him. It was the same for the commanders and warriors. Relying on their productivity, the side effects caused by the movement of the world were quickly resolved. All sorts of damaged traffic arteries and tall buildings were repaired one after another. The damage caused by the changes in the terrain and climate were also eliminated. After all, These commanders were all superhuman existences who could topple mountains and overturn seas. Once they were used to build buildings and repair traffic arteries, their speed would be unrivaled. Moreover, there was also the heavenly river virtual image that Urbian had turned into, encompassing the stars at all times. Ever since he had manifested his heavenly river virtual image that day, Urbian had been turning into that heavenly river that encompassed the clouds and sky, circling above Earth. It was as if he had become a rule and a phenomenon in the natural world. He was lofty, yet he surrounded all aspects of people's lives. He would control the atmospheric circulation, change the temperature, transform the magnetic field, and keep all humans at 25 degrees Celsius normal temperature. The weather would be favorable, and it would be like spring all year round. There would even be no rain, unless it was on the paddy fields that needed irrigation. He could also purify the air, control the ocean currents, and solve all environmental pollution problems. Animals and plants would no longer have to worry about environmental degradation. Even humans themselves would not have to worry about air pollution, ocean pollution, and other problems. The average health level of humans would increase in a straight line. There was no need to talk about crimes. At the moment when the heavenly river shrouded the heads of humans, the laws that Urbian had set up were announced on everyone's laptops, cell phones, and other electronic products. All crimes were punishable by death, and the human world ushered in an unprecedentedly harsh criminal law. In a short period of time, there was a reign of terror, and blood flowed like a river. No ruler in history could do such a thing, because once such a strict law was implemented, it would inevitably lead to a backlash from the entire society. Who had not made mistakes? Who did not have one or two friends, relatives, or even blood relatives who had made mistakes? This was especially so for the upper echelons of society. They were extremely wealthy and could do anything they wanted. How could they allow themselves to die because of a commoner, or even die because of a small mistake? Once the upper echelons objected, the people would seethe with resentment, and the rule would be destroyed. However, Urbian did not need to worry about these. It was because his rule had never come from any aristocrats, military groups, or the so-called popular will. It was because he could single-handedly kill all the aristocrats, armies, and people. He did not need to use benefits to win over anyone, nor did he need to curry favor with any aristocrats, armies, or people. It was because he himself had gathered the world's greatest power. He did not need external objects, and he alone could provide the entire human society with the energy consumption. Therefore, no one in the world could stop him if he wanted to do something. Perhaps he might not be able to monitor the crimes committed by several billion people in the world at all times. However, even if he were to monitor several hundreds of thousands or millions of people and then take turns, it would be enough to make all the criminals tremble in fear. Those who raped their wives and daughters would be killed. Those who snatched others' belongings would be killed. Those who took away others' lives would be killed. Those who embezzled public property would be killed. During the first few days after the law was promulgated, the heavenly river in the atmosphere surged and descended countless times, taking away many lives. This immediately caused a backlash from countless people. On one hand, it was the opposition from those who had been sentenced to death. On the other hand, it was the opposition from those who felt that the crimes did not warrant the death penalty. There were also the series of issues as to whether the crimes were to be convicted, how to convict them, and how to arrest them. A storm was stirred up in the land. Simultaneously, the united government that Urbian had planned was also in the midst of intense preparations. With the 13 armies leaders as the backbone, several tens of generals as the wings, and countless politicians, scientists, scholars, and military elites from over 100 countries gathered together, this massive government was in the midst of intense preparations. Even if they wanted to set up a united government, the various political systems, military establishment, finance, language, and writing would be enough for the heads of various countries to hold a meeting for several decades. However, with the pressure from the god Urbian above them, all sorts of problems were resolved with a single word, and the efficiency instantly increased by several hundred or even several thousand times. unifying the writing, culture, laws, and policies. Even though countless people objected, and there were all sorts of demonstrations, hunger strikes, and suicides, no one could shake Urbian's will and actions. 1 month passed by, and there were still countless people who objected. It was because as long as one did not violate the laws that Urbian had set up, one would not be arrested no matter how much one cursed him. Therefore, there were naturally many people who objected to his policies. However, demonstrations and any opposing actions that caused destruction would be violently suppressed by Urbian. Right now, there were no longer any organizations or individuals who would dare to risk their lives and use intense means to oppose the unification. At the very least, they no longer existed in the open. As for those who objected in the dark, there were countless of them. However, many ambitious people, including the commanders of the 7 armies, understood that there was probably no one in this world who could stop Urbian. Those who still intended to resist were just like mantises trying to stop a chariot. Right now, at the center of the land, in the New Earth Federation's central city. This was one of the 12 first-rate cities on Earth that Urbian had moved to. It was like a giant city with a population of over 70 million. It could be said that over 70% of the world's elites, countless wealthy people, and the army's warriors, including the 7 commanders, were gathered here. Chapter 9:51. Hui stood in a tall building of the United Government, looking at the flourishing scene outside the floor-to-ceiling glass window. He sighed and said, "Brother Longmai, are you still unwilling to surrender?" The person standing next to Hui, he was the White Army's former commander, Priest Longmai. Ever since they had been captured by Urbian, all the people from the White Army had been split up and placed under the other armies. Priest Longmai was personally watched over by the other 6 commanders. Hearing Hui's words, Priest Longmai frowned and said, "Urbian has already seen through the profoundness of space-time with his remarkable abilities. This is something that I admire. However, he has attempted to reverse humanity, distort history, and become obsessed with it. He suppressed the souls and wills of everyone in the world, killing until blood flowed like rivers. Although I admire him, I don't wish to work for him, submit to him, and let him enslave my will." Hearing Priest Longmai's words, Hui shook his head and said, 13 general-level and colonel-level characters from the Yellow Army were executed yesterday." Priest Longmai frowned, and Hui continued, "From now on, the Yellow Army can only rely on things like horror movies, stories, and games if they wish to spread terror. All other actions that endanger public safety and harm others will be punished with capital punishment. If it wasn't for Lord Urbian, do you think that the 13 armies would be able to achieve this due to the internal strife?" Priest Longmai let out a breath and said, "For him to be able to do this, he must have saved over 10,000 people. However, ever since 1 month ago, countless people have been killed for petty thefts, accidental injuries, legitimate counterattacks, and even those who were unaware of their crimes. The number has already exceeded 300,000, right?" He looked at Hui and said, "Moreover, no matter what the reason is for what Urbian wants to do, he ultimately wants to enslave all of our wills. He wants to replace the will of the heavens with his own will and make all of us live under the rules of his will." He smiled bitterly and said, "If that's the case, then I'd rather die." Hui sighed. He knew that these people from the White Army were all existences with an extremely strong desire to pursue Tao. People like them would naturally not be willing to be restrained. This was especially so when Urbian used violence to coerce all superhumans into turning them into productive machines. For the sake of society's progress, he sacrificed his own cultivation. This was the complete opposite of Taoist Longmai's ideals. Hui then thought of himself. During this period of time, his powers kept on weakening. After all, the entire world was operating according to Urbian's will. He had lost all the influences that he controlled, and the Grey Army's ring's energy naturally became increasingly lesser. On the other hand, he obeyed Urbian time and time again, and it was equivalent to his disposition being constantly distorted by Urbian's violence. If for the sake of preserving his life, He could only submit. Wasn't this a form of destruction as well? However, he was different from the dragon maze. The dragon maze could beg for death, but he was willing to submit. Why do you have to do this? Hui shook his head and said, "Today is the establishment day of the United Government. Let's go out for a walk." After saying that, he brought the dragon maze down from the building and walked on the streets of the central city. The laws were very strict, and even they were not allowed to casually fly above the central city without permission. As the two of them walked on the bustling street, they could see that there was an endless number of shops on the street. There was a sea of people, but everything was in order. Although the past few months of chaos had passed, there were no signs of war at all. A hint of amazement flashed in Hui's eyes. Although the Gray Army and the White Army's ideals were different, wasn't what Erbian was doing now what the Gray Army's past commanders had wanted to do? Controlling yin and yang, becoming the law of the land, and unifying the wills of the millions upon millions of people in the world. Each and every one of his actions had the ability to change the world. Something like ruling over the entire world and controlling everyone's lives had always been Hui's dream. Moreover, in Hui's opinion, the current Earth was in an orderly manner. The country was peaceful, and everyone was well-behaved. It was many times better than in the past. The only thing that was lacking was that the ruler was Erbian and not Hui. However, if the United Government could really unleash its effects and allow Erbian to be placed in a high position, the symbolic meaning would be greater than the actual meaning. It might not be impossible for Hui to get share of the throne. Once he could rule over several billion people in the world, to what extent would his gray energy rise explosively? At the thought of this, his eyes narrowed slightly, but he hid all of the ambitions in his heart. Hui said, "If this goes on, 20 years later, the world will probably be in harmony. There will no longer be any differences between cultures, races, or countries. Humanity will also welcome an unprecedented era of prosperity." There were no waves in Priest Longmai's eyes, and he did not show any reaction to Hui's words. The two of them chatted as they walked, witnessing the prosperity of the central city. However, no matter how much Hui persuaded, Priest Longmai seemed unwilling to really surrender. The two of them walked into a supermarket and looked at the crowd. Hui said, "I don't understand. Since you're willing to work under Fang Xinjiang, why aren't you willing to work under Erbian now? What's the difference? Could it be that you're still waiting for him to come back?" Longmai shook his head and said, "Although Fang Xinjiang orders us to work for him, he won't oppress my spirit and will, asking me to change my character and follow the rules. Ulpian, on the other hand, wants to place his will above everyone else's, making everyone act according to his code of conduct. With such actions, he views all living beings in the world as his puppets. How can I agree to this?" Hui shook his head. He knew that this was a dead end and that there was probably no way to resolve it easily. As for waiting for Fang Xinjiang to come back, the two of them knew that it was impossible. With the realm that Erbian had displayed, it would be useless no matter who came back. Just then, the United Government's establishment ceremony was starting in the television on the counter. At this moment, the gazes of several billion people across the world were gathered on the live broadcast of the ceremony. Several hundred cameras were set up in the government building, covering the entire place from all angles. The people in the hall were the United Government's upper echelon, as well as many experts from the 13 armies. Edward was seated in the first row, quietly looking at the rostrum. No one knew what he was thinking. Just as the live broadcast began, traces of silver light spread out in the void and gathered behind the podium. In an instant, it turned into a silver-haired, silver-eyed man with a back that was as straight as the firmament. Galaxies gathered in his eyes, as if the great Tao was flowing. It was the Silver Army's commander, the strongest expert on Earth at the moment, Erbian. Looking at the people present and the countless cameras, Erbian said calmly, "Hello, everyone. I'm Erbian. After 1 month of intense preparation, the Earth's United Government has finally been established. From today onward, there will no longer be any countries. All humans will belong to one country, one race, and one culture. Chapter 952. Feng Xingjian took about 8 minutes to arrive on Earth. When he stood outside the atmospheric layer and looked down at the Earth that had changed beyond recognition, even with his cultivation, he could not help but be taken by surprise. However, at the next moment, this surprise turned into a feeling of joy. Good. This is really good. Such a remarkable ability is suitable to be the test for me to attain a breakthrough to level 6. Waves of sword intense flowed out from his body, trembling incessantly as if wanting to shatter void space and annihilate the world. It was as if he could not wait to fight with the other party. However, Feng Xingjian smiled and moved his feet, descending toward the only piece of land on Earth. Although Feng Xingjian was filled with battle intent and confidence in himself, he would not act blindly. Instead, he would plan before taking action and gather information about his opponent first. After walking around the land for a while, Feng Xingjian understood what Erbian had been doing for the past 1 month. He was once again amazed by Erbian's great efforts. Raising his head and looking at the sky, Feng Xingjian looked at the surging heavenly river in the sky. His eyes narrowed slightly. Is this the heavenly river? His virtual image? That's right. Behind Feng Xingjian, the immortal child had arrived. He looked at the virtual image in the sky and said, "This person's virtual image has been maintained for an entire month. Although he seems to be a little inexperienced in using it compared to a Tier 6 divine level expert, his foundations are deep and hard to find." Feng Xingjian nodded inwardly. This was also the other party's advantage. The ring's energy was endless, and he could keep on drawing out demonic gods' powers for his own use. Therefore, he did not have to worry about energy depletion. It was like a perpetual motion machine. Moreover, what he had been doing for the past 1 month was to replace the heaven's will with his own will, turning it into a blade above everyone's heads and enslaving the will of the entire human society. His boldness and magnanimity could be said to be the greatest among all the opponents Feng Xingjian had encountered. At the next moment, the immortal child had already turned to look at Feng Xingjian. His gaze was grim as he said, "Brother Feng, now that you've come out of seclusion, do you still have the confidence to deal with this person?" In the past month, he had been shocked by Erbian's series of tricks. His confidence in this battle had dropped by at least 20%. Feng Xingjian said calmly, "My celestial eradication sword technique has already reached the pinnacle below Tier 6 of the divine level. I can't win against him now, and I won't be able to win against him even after 100 years. Besides, you and I have been preparing for a long time. Now the arrow is already knocked on the bowstring and has to be released." The immortal child smiled in relief and said, "That's right. Besides, it's already a great fortune to be able to work with the two of us." The next moment, he looked in the direction of Central City and smiled. "Then let's go." The live broadcast of the conference was still going on. Below the podium, Edward looked at Erbian. His eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking about. Next to him, the Green Army's Ming Wang, the Red Army's Akaryu Jushru, and the Orange Army's Reverend Fahui were all present. Their gazes flickered as they carried the Thunder Calamity, Abyss, and Light Pursuit swords with them. They looked at Erbian, who was on the podium, with cold gleams in the depths of their gazes. On the podium, Erbian was saying, "With the help of the Gold Army's technology and my powers, the problem of food will be completely resolved. My heavenly river will circulate in the atmospheric layer 24 hours a day. 3 months later, I'll grant its authority, and all humans will be able to make use of the heavenly river to conduct space-time transmissions. The problem of transportation will be resolved at its core. As the problem of transportation is resolved, humans will be able to make use of the heavenly river to reach all their destinations. Transportation will no longer be a problem, and neither will housing prices. With the convenience of the heavenly river, there won't be any difference where everyone lives and works. Everyone will have their own housing, and the problem of housing will be resolved at its core." As Erbian said these words, the entire world was in an uproar. It was because he did not talk about any great principles or empty words. Instead, he talked about the tangible benefits that everyone would receive. Erbian continued, Of course, with the circulation of the heavenly river, my will also encompass the entire world. My eyes will forever be on all of you. No one will be able to go against the laws, and anything that harms others will be forbidden. Humans are about to enter an unprecedented era of prosperity, but not everyone will have the right to enter. Edward looked at Urbian, who was on the podium, and thought, his sense of justice is really getting more and more prejudiced. Right now, he'll naturally be able to suppress Urbian with unrivaled power and violence. However, human nature is greedy and ugly to begin with. Unless we brainwash all of humanity, if we continue to suppress them like this, Edward did not think highly of Urbian's violent suppression. Moreover, in his opinion, many of the things that Urbian had forbidden were humans' desires to begin with. There was no distinction between good and evil, right or wrong. It was just that Urbian was forcefully imposing his view of good and evil onto everyone. However, although he'll fail, as long as Urbian is still alive, he'll have countless chances to redo things. It's true that this person's realm and power are unrivaled in the world. Just as Edward was thinking of this, the entire building trembled slightly, and gasps rang out. The roof suddenly broke down and shattered, as if many blocks of building blocks had been lifted up by someone. They flew out into the sky, revealing everyone in the venue. Urbian, a cold voice rang out in everyone's minds. It was as if a stream of sword light had flashed past, or a bolt of lightning had streaked out. Everyone felt that it was extremely sharp and piercing. Feng Xingjian. Everyone looked at this scene in astonishment. It was as if they had not expected that the other party would appear once again. Moreover, it seemed that he was going to fight it out with Urbian. Urbian lifted his head. In fact, right now, he had turned into the heavenly river, and the appearance on the rostrum was just something that he had intentionally displayed. If he wanted to see Feng Xingjian, he would have already had a 360-degree view of him. Feng Xingjian, to think that you still dare to come out. I didn't expect this. Feng Xingjian grabbed out with one hand, and the white bow and long sword seemed to be drawn out from void space bit by bit. Holding onto this divine remains equipment, which was forged from his ribs and was connected to his heart, Feng Xingjian said slowly, I also didn't expect that a genius like you would be born in this world with such a short cultivation history. You control space, have the world in your heart, and single-handedly suppress the spirits of all living beings in the world. You're already worthy of me going all out to deal with you. Urbian looked at him calmly, like the heavens were looking down on mortals. It was as if Feng Xingjian's appearance was unable to stir up any ripples in his heart. Feng Xingjian, you're not bad. If you're willing to contribute to humanity, my plan can be accelerated by at least 10%, Feng Xingjian said with a sigh. He sighed slightly, bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. It's not too late for you to stop now. I've killed too many people in this month. But if I don't kill you, I won't be able to attain my Tao. Feng Xingjian let out a cold laugh and slashed down with a white bone longsword. In that instant, sword cheese tore through the world, and a stream of white air that was 30 kilometers long descended from the sky. It lashed out at the atmosphere, bringing about a series of plasma flames. It was as if it wanted to slash the entire central city into two. Urbian looked at this scene calmly and disappeared at the next moment. Simultaneously, the heavenly river in the atmosphere suddenly seethed, and the splashing sounds of water rang out in the world. Under the astonished gazes of countless people, the heavenly river and the sword cheese collided, and an unprecedented battle finally broke out. Chapter 9:53. The overwhelming sword cheese collided intensely with the heavenly river that was surging over. However, at almost the instant they collided, the sword cheese and the plasma tail flames that were formed from the friction with the air were transferred away. The sword cheese and the tail flames that were 30 kilometers long were instantly condensed into a single point by the heavenly river's spatial transfer. Then they exploded loudly behind Feng Xingjian. Faced with the sudden sword cheese, Feng Xingjian let out a long laugh. With a backhand sword attack, he scattered the sword cheese that could destroy an entire city. At the next moment, with a flash, Fang Xingjian appeared in the atmosphere of the heavenly river and slashed out with his sword. With a single slash, it was as if several 10,000 or several 100,000 swords had been slashed out. A million streams of sword cheese tore through the world and exploded from his body. It was as if they were going to stir up the wind and clouds and destroy the atmospheric circulation above the entire land. Moving at light speed, Erbian, who had turned into the heavenly river, had a slight thought, and the silver river swept out. Wherever it passed by, all the sword cheese would be engulfed and then released toward the universe in outer space. Fang Xingjian did not stop at all. He instantly turned into a myriad of sword tempest, flashing in the atmosphere at light speed. Each time he stopped, he would release a myriad of sword cheese, tearing the atmosphere apart and stirring up the vacuum. Don't you want to save humanity? Then I'll wipe out humanity first. With an explosive bellow, violent powers seethed in the atmospheric layer, turning into high temperatures that ignited the atmosphere. The sky was illuminated with a red glow. With Fang Xingjian's powers, an attack like this, which seemed to be fearful of him, could destroy the entire Earth's ecological environment within a few minutes. He would turn the surface of the entire planet into hell and kill 99% of humanity. You're courting death. At the sight of this scene, killing intent seethed in Erbian's heart. The silver river turned into many roaring silver dragons that gushed out toward Fang Xingjian. The heavenly river encompassed the entire land, and rumbling sounds kept on ringing out in the sky. The silver river, which could be seen by the naked eye, seethed and gathered toward Fang Xingjian like the eye of a typhoon. They surrounded Fang Xingjian from all directions without any blind spots, continuously using the Milky Way to negate and divert Fang Xingjian's sword qi. Everyone on the continent was alarmed by the abnormality in the sky. Countless TV and online media began to report the shocking battle that took place in Central City. Edward looked at Fang Xingjian in shock. He really wants to fight to the death with Erbian? At the same time, the violent Milky Way compressed Fang Xingjian's living space inch by inch. Streams of heavenly rivers that were over several thousand kilometers long came roaring, sweeping toward Fang Xingjian like galloping dragons. Even though Fang Xingjian possessed the ability to move at light speed, the heavenly river did not leave any gaps. This meant that if Fang Xingjian wanted to charge out, he would have to touch the heavenly river. Disappear. Erbian watched as the heavenly river became increasingly turbulent, compressing Fang Xingjian's living space incessantly. Fang Xingjian, who was being suppressed under the encirclement, charged out left and right, but was still unable to break out. In that instant, a world-shattering sound rang out, and a myriad of silver waters that were comparable to the Yangtze River and Yellow River smashed out toward the spot where Fang Xingjian was at. The Milky Way, which weighed millions and millions of tons, collided together. It was a world-shaking prowess, and it was as if the entire world was trembling. The terrifying repulsive force caused the colliding silver seas to be transmitted out at a speed of several thousand meters per second. The shock waves formed, killed off the cloud layers within a range of 10,000 lis. The collision force of Erbian's attack was just something that happened in passing. The even more terrifying thing was that the heavenly river's spatial translocation would be activated simultaneously, splitting the target's body into billions of parts and scattering them across the entire ocean through spatial translocation. Goodbye. However, at the instant of the collision, the white bone longsword in Fang Xingjian's hand slashed out a myriad of sword light. Sword force reached the microscopic world, colliding with each of the Milky Way's particles. His powers reached the microscopic limits of space and were no longer affected by the heavenly river's spatial translocation. To think that he has cultivated his sword arts to such a level. In Erbian's senses, the tip of the white bone longsword in Fang Xingjian's hand seemed to have turned into an extremely small The powers of each sword attack acted directly within the volume of the plank space, acting at the ends of space and the smallest unit of volume in the universe. Each sword attack clashed with each particle of the heavenly river, fighting it out with power and negating the heavenly river's spatial translocation. It was only when one reached this realm that they would be able to counterattack the heavenly river's forces and negate the other party's spatial translocation. In that instant, several million tons of the Milky Way was vaporized into a myriad of white gas. The white bone longsword collided intensely with the particles of the heavenly river in all directions. Each collision seemed to be able to distort space, and countless microscopic black holes would disappear and reappear. Wherever the longsword passed by, an area of 1,000 cubic meters of space would be forcefully separated. The white bone longsword was unable to take a single step past the area. Once the Milky Way charged over, it would be slashed and vaporized by the white bone longsword. In the past, when he had fought against the heavenly Lion King, who possessed the heavenly lion beast corpse and was able to perform spatial translocation, Fang Xingjian had been helpless against spatial translocation. However, right now, his sword arts had reached the pinnacle of the microscopic realm, and each portion of his sword force was directly acting on the plank space. This meant that his sword force would no longer be easily shifted away. Erbian, is this all you have? Looking at the Milky Way that he was unable to cross even half a step past, Fang Xingjian laughed out loud. Then take another attack from me. Right now, Fang Xingjian's martial will had reached 8,000 points. What kind of concept was that? It was a power that could push the continental shelves, change the trajectories of asteroids, destroy the world, and crush all humans. Amidst the maniacal laughter, the myriad of sword light and sword cheese dissipated abruptly. Fang Xingjian raised the white bone longsword high up, and at the next moment, he slashed down fiercely toward the central city. It was the all-conquering sword that he had unleashed at full power. With this sword attack, it was as if the world was turned upside down and the sun and moon sank. Wherever the long sword passed by, everything in the world would disintegrate. The power would distort space, forming a stretch of darkness that charged out toward the land. When the power reached an extreme, other than the space itself, everything in the space would be repelled. Even light would not be able to remain. Therefore, everyone could only see a stretch of darkness charging out toward the land after Fang Xingjian slashed down with his sword. It was as if the area within a range of 100 lis had instantly fallen into absolute darkness. The pure darkness tore through the heavenly river like shock waves, charging out toward the land. Once this sword attack struck the land's surface, it would be able to shatter the entire land into pieces. The condensed area of darkness would engulf 1/3 of the land, and the seawater would drown over half of the land. Several 100 million tons of sand would soar into the sky from this attack, filling up the atmosphere and turning the sky that had been on Earth for the past 100 years into a grayish-yellow color. Sunlight would be covered for several decades, and humans would welcome the cold winter of doomsday. Chapter 954. With a single sword attack, he could destroy the entire Earth's ecosystem. At the sight of this scene, the killing intent in Erbian's eyes grew even more intense, and the silver river in the sky seemed to become 10 times more violent. Fang Xingjian, you've really infuriated me. Just as Fang Xingjian's full-powered sword attack turned into absolute darkness that tore apart the silver river and struck out toward the land, the several billion people in the land suddenly realized that the heavenly river above their heads had suddenly disappeared. No, it was not that all of the heavenly rivers had disappeared. Not only did the heavenly rivers in the central city not disappear, but they also continued to increase at an unbelievable rate. Initially, the roaring heavenly rivers had only been lake water. However, in the blink of an eye, the depth of the heavenly rivers had exceeded 10 kilometers. Moreover, they were still increasing, turning from lake water into an ocean. Is this a self-transfer? Fang Xingjian instantly understood. using the heavenly river as a medium to transfer the heavenly river itself. The heavenly river above the entire land instantly gathered in the sky above the central city. The Silver River, which was comparable to the water volume of the entire Pacific Ocean, surged into the sky. Amidst furious bellows, it clashed fiercely against Fang Xingjian's sword attack with a power that could tear apart the entire land. At the instant of this collision, Fang Xingjian sensed that something was amiss. Each stream of sword force, each impact, and each attack that could disintegrate everything in the world were all negated by the opposing force. Ever since the start of the battle, this was the first time Fang Xingjian felt astonished. It was because the heavenly river currents that soared into the sky under his feet had negated the all-conquering sword's attack with streams of power that were completely opposite to the all-conquering sword. Right now, how complicated was the output structure of the all-conquering sword that Fang Xingjian had slashed out? It was an extreme destructive power that could instantly destroy countless physical substances. Even Fang Xingjian himself was unable to calculate every single point of output. However, right now, Erbian had used such an unbelievable technique to negate the all-conquering sword. This was probably a defensive technique that Fang Xingjian had never thought of before. At the next moment, countless thunderbolts, flames, and high temperatures surged out from the Milky Way. It was clear that Erbian was going to unleash some sort of move to completely obliterate Fang Xingjian. However, I finally managed to gather the heavenly river. Fang Xingjian looked at the seething heavenly river beneath his feet, and the corners of his lips curled up into a hint of a smile. Initially, the heavenly river phantom image that the other party had turned and had taken up more than half of the planet's surface, making it hard for him to launch any effective attacks. Just as he had expected, the attack that was aimed at the land gathered the heavenly river above the central city. Then it can be activated. Fang Xingjian's eyes narrowed, and in the next moment, his entire body erupted with a myriad of sword lights. At the same time, in the venue, Edward was dumbfounded as he looked at the scene in the sky. Perhaps it could be said that everyone who could watch the battle and had the ability to understand the battlefield was shocked speechless. Edward sighed and said, Fang Xingjian's series of attacks is sufficient to wipe out humanity and kill me several hundred times over. However, Erbian is even more amazing. If Fang Xingjian is a god, then Erbian is a god among gods. Just then, the gazes of Ming Wang, Fa Huwei, and Akaryu Jushru suddenly narrowed. They raised the chasing light, thunder calamity, and abyss in their hands and dashed out toward the sky. We can't let Fang Xingjian do as he pleases. We must stop him from wiping out humanity. In the blink of an eye, the three of them had dashed up into the sky and clashed into the Milky Way. At the sight of this scene, Edward was slightly stunned. Are they crazy? A battle like this is no longer something we can interfere in. Erbian looked at the three people who had dashed into the Milky Way and frowned. Leave the battlefield. However, the three of them turned a deaf ear to Fang Xingjian. Right now, their eyes were filled with a dazed look. They were like three marionettes, raising their long swords and slashing out fiercely toward the Milky Way around them. What are you guys doing? Erbian frowned. At the next moment, his countenance changed drastically. That's not right. It has already happened. It was only at this moment that Fang Xingjian realized that the Akaryu Jushru and the other two seemed to be images that were one beat slower. In his true vision, the long swords in their hands had already slashed down. At the next moment, the long swords turned into dust and burst out with terrifying sword light. It was only at this moment that the three of them suddenly regained their senses. Their countenances changed drastically as they looked at the divine swords in their hands that had gone out of control. What's going on? What on earth has happened? The thunder calamity, abyss, and Panwei exploded simultaneously. Simultaneously, Fang Xingjian held onto the white bone long sword and slashed out fiercely toward the heavenly river from the outside. Simultaneously, as the white bone longsword slashed down, it shattered inch by inch and also started to self-destruct. From the perspective of the three commanders, Fang Xingjian was stepping on void space and walking toward the three of them. Wherever he passed by, the silver river seemed as if it did not exist. When the three of them saw Fang Xingjian, they were taken aback. Just as they were about to take action, they realized that their bodies were already charging toward the three divine swords that had self-destructed uncontrollably. Fang Xingjian, what have you done? By now, how could the three of them not know that they had fallen into Fang Xingjian's trap? In fact, from the moment they had gotten their hands on the three divine swords, Fang Xingjian's illusory arts had already slowly taken root in their hearts. Right now, the moment it was activated, the three of them would instantly find an opportunity to go to the interior of Erbian's heavenly river and self-destruct. Even Erbian had been deceived by this illusory art. He did not have the time to divert the effects of the divine sword's self-destructions, which were at the limits of the microscopic world. Just as the divine swords were about to send all their powers into the self-destructions, Erbian realized that the scene he was seeing was a delayed illusion. The heavenly river's spatial translocation was instantly activated, and the three commanders were teleported out. However, the three divine swords' explosive powers had already reached the pinnacle of the microscopic realm, and they were unable to be teleported out casually. The Thunder Calamity, Abyss, and Panway divine swords had depleted Fang Xingjian's heavenly and earthly treasures, divine equipment, and power. Almost each of them possessed the powers of a Tier 5 divine level expert. Right now, when they self-destructed, it was as if several 100,000 nuclear missiles had exploded. Moreover, there were three swords that had self-destructed inside the heavenly river, and there were also white bone longswords that had self-destructed outside the heavenly river. Even the celestial eradication sword formation, which was formed by the four longswords, was faintly appearing in void space. It shattered inch by inch and started to collapse. The celestial eradication sword formation was also self-destructed by Fang Xingjian. The powers from the self-destruction vaporized the silver river crazily. Simultaneously, a world faintly appeared behind Fang Xingjian. The celestial eradication sword formation collapsed, and the divine country was destroyed. Open up! With an explosive bellow, the divine country instantly collapsed, and the compressed space swelled up fiercely toward the heavenly river. Two waves of explosive powers, one from the inside and one from the outside, seemed to instantly connect the heavenly river from the inside out. At this moment, overwhelming silver waves were set off, evaporating an unknown amount of the silver river and sea. Chapter 955. In an instant, all the swords, sword formations, and sword realm self-destructed. Violent powers engulfed the world as if countless nuclear missiles had exploded. If no one were to fend them off, this gush of power would be able to kill all the humans within a range of several thousand leagues. It could even sink a small portion of the continents and the tsunamis that would engulf the remaining continents. The global temperature would then rise, the magnetic fields would change, and even the planet's orbits would be deflected by several meters. Therefore, in order to ensure that the Earth would not be affected in the least, Erbian could only unleash his full power and accurately fend off the prowess of each self-destruction. The swords, sword formations, and sword realm self-destructed at the same time, turning into a myriad of energy that vaporized the heavenly river. Simultaneously, a world that contained all the sword techniques in the world soared into the sky and was born in the heavenly river. A sword mark split open in the heavenly river. It was like the entrance to another world, and countless sword chis extended out from it. Fang Xingjian's series of means were extremely fast. Combined with the effects of illusory arts, he did not give Erbian any time to react at all. He had self-destructed the swords, sword formations, and sword realm. He then made use of the force from the self-destruction to destroy the heavenly river and rebuild the divine country at the same time. This was also what Fang Xingjian had planned long ago. After attaining another breakthrough in his sword arts, he gave up on the swords, sword formations, and sword realm that he had in the past. He self-destructed all of them and rebuilt the divine country. Fang Xingjian took a step forward and stepped into the new divine country. The energy that had dissipated from the surrounding explosions was like swallows returning to their nests. It was like iron and stone that had been attracted by a magnet, and all of them were drawn toward the divine country. At the next moment, that sword mark expanded rapidly, and the new divine country seemed to have overlapped with the real world. The sword intense from the white bones, thunder calamity, abyss, panway, and celestial eradication, sword formations darted out fiercely toward the divine country, causing the spatial structure of the new divine country to become increasingly stable, and the sword intense and it became increasingly intense. At this moment, Fang Xingjian made use of Erbian's pressure to self-destruct the swords, sword formations, and sword realm. He then merged the three of them into one, rebuilding the divine country and rebuilding the sword realm. Hundreds of millions of sword marks were like cracks in space, spreading out in all directions with Fang Xingjian's body as the center. Each sword mark emitted a terrifying aura. From this moment on, the immortal slaying four swords and the immortal slaying sword formation no longer existed. Fang Xingjian crushed them all, fusing them into his god kingdom and becoming one with him. It was Fang Xingjian's divine kingdom, sword realm. How dare you? Seeing this scene, Erbian smiled coldly. Is this your preparation? After expending a great amount of energy, Erbian finally managed to quell the repercussions of the self-destruction. He looked at Fang Xingjian, who was surrounded by a myriad of sword marks. The heavenly river trembled, and his cold voice rang out. Unfortunately, it's meaningless. At the next instant, with a flash of light and shadow, the entire heavenly river and Fang Xingjian disappeared from Earth without a trace. They've left. Edward looked at the sky in a daze and nodded. That's right. Erbian has too many reservations if he stays here. It's only by leaving Earth that he'll be able to unleash his full power. He looked at the empty sky, and a cold gleam flashed in his eyes. They've left. He turned to look at Priest Longmai and said, when Erbian returns to Earth once again, Fang Xingjian will definitely die. With Earth as the battlefield, Erbian has too many reservations, and it's not easy for him to unleash even 1/10 of his powers. You'll never be able to imagine how terrifying he is. You'll know from the battle earlier that although Fang Xingjian is strong, he still won't be able to escape from Erbian. To think that he wasn't able to harm the central city in the slightest, even when he went all out. Priest Longmai's countenance was grim as he looked at the scattered white clouds in the sky. It was as if he was anticipating something. However, just then, the live broadcast on the television continued. Erbian had restored the destroyed venue to its original state. Right now, he was once again standing on the rostrum and continuing his speech. It was as if what had happened earlier was just an illusion. A small accident happened. Let's continue. A small accident. Priest Longmai let out a long exhale as he looked at Erbian. On Mars, with a flash of light and shadow, a myriad of silver rivers appeared on this planet that was filled with gravel. Fang Xingjian was stunned for a moment before he reacted at the next moment. He transferred the space I'm in, but why didn't I sense his actions in advance? Suddenly, Fang Xingjian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the myriad of silver rivers in the sky and said, You performed illusory arts earlier? He understood what had happened. It was just like how he had covered up Erbian's senses earlier, causing Erbian to be unable to stop the self-detonation in time. Right now, Erbian had also covered up Fang Xingjian's senses, causing him to be unable to stop the spatial translocation in time. With a rumble, Fang Xingjian was slapped by an invisible force. In that instant, he turned into a myriad of light spots in the sky, as if he could not be any more dead than he was. Modifying electromagnetic signals? I learned it the first time he did it. At the next moment, light and shadow flashed once again, and the two of them arrived on Jupiter. Wind and sand that kept on moving at supersonic speed collided intensely against the silver rivers. Due to the sudden appearance of the massive heavenly river, Jupiter's gales instantly changed. Fang Xingjian also stepped out from void space. Earlier on, Erbian had attacked him with illusory arts, and Fang Xingjian had faked his death using illusory arts. However, Erbian had covered up Fang Xingjian's senses with illusory arts and performed spatial translocation once again. Right now, Fang Xingjian's heart was extremely grim. After the series of exchanges, Erbian's control over illusory arts was no weaker than Fang Xingjian's. This was especially so when Erbian was complemented by spatial translocation. This was even more amazing than Fang Xingjian's illusory arts. Looking at the endless amount of dust and sand on Jupiter, Fang Xingjian's eyes emitted a cold gleam. You split a portion of the heavenly river and reached other planets at superluminal speed, then used spatial translocation to transfer us all the way. That's right, but still meaningless. Light and shadow flashed again, and the two of them arrived on Saturn. The surroundings were filled with an ocean of hydrogen and helium. Clearly, with Erbian's spatial translocation, the two of them were getting further and further away from Earth. However, at the next moment, Fang Xingjian broke into a grin. Are you sure that this is really Saturn? The entire stretch of space shattered slowly. After the shattered pieces of space appeared, the scene of Earth's central city appeared. It's useless. Different parts of the heavenly river are on different planets, and I can observe different parts of myself at any time to confirm the location of the main body. Unless your illusory arts can encompass all parts of the heavenly river, which means that you have to cross a distance of several planets, you can't think of lying to me. At the next moment, the bustling central city had once again turned into Saturn's frozen ocean. However, Fang Xingjian had also disappeared. Fang Xingjian's cold voice rang out in the ocean. I'm unable to change your perception, but you won't be able to find me either. Erbian smiled. I might not be able to find you, but do you know where you are? The world before Fang Xingjian's eyes shattered and peeled off once again. The world turned into a bluish-white color, and the atmosphere was filled with hydrogen atoms. There were all sorts of rocks, water-ice substances, and a tremendous amount of frozen methane under his feet. This was Uranus. Fang Xingjian was stunned for a moment before he reacted. I've already reached Uranus long ago. The period of time I spent on Saturn was fake. On the other side, Erbian's voice continued to ring out. My strength is stronger than yours, and my calculative abilities are higher than yours. The range of my control over my strength is wider than yours, and I even have the ability to spatial translocation. It's impossible for you to win against me. As long as I'm willing to, you won't even know where you are. However, at the next moment, a myriad of sword light broke through the heavenly river, interrupting Erbian's spatial translocation toward Fang Xingjian. This caused him to be unable to teleport Fang Xingjian to the next planet like he had done previously. Erbian's brows raised. How did you discover this? Chapter 956. Erbian raised his brows. How did you discover that? Forget it. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. For consecutive swoosh sounds rang out, and the sharp swords that were formed from the four heavenly rivers pierced through Fang Xingjian's four limbs. The seething silver river gushed into his body, invading every inch of space in his body. Every inch of space was compressed by Erbian's powers, and a power of several 100 million tons erupted in an instant, causing countless cracks to appear on Fang Xingjian's conjured physique. The repercussions of the attacks lashed out at the atmosphere, forming streams of shock waves that were several tens of times that of supersonic speed. They spread out rapidly, flattening the land within a range of several thousand leagues. This simple move was already sufficient to wipe out a large half of humanity on Earth. This was also the reason why it was not easy for Erbian to unleash his full powers on Earth. The complete suppression in terms of powers made it hard for Fang Xingjian to move. Even his martial will was compressed within this small space, making it hard for him to escape at light speed. Fang Xingjian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said in slight astonishment, "What an astonishing learning speed. Your talent in illusory arts is even stronger than mine. Several tens of silver rivers were like many dancing snakes, gathering before Fang Xingjian, forming Erbian's upper body. He reached out and tapped Fang Xingjian's forehead. Therefore, let me see for myself what you did earlier. His finger tapped out toward Fang Xingjian's forehead, as if he wanted to use his own consciousness to read Fang Xingjian's consciousness. However, just as he was about to do that, Fang Xingjian smiled again, revealing a hint of a brutal smile. I've already said that your talent in illusory arts is stronger than mine. However, it's just that your talent is stronger than mine. As Fang Xingjian said this, he lifted his head and looked over. Erbian was slightly stunned. Then he seemed to react to something and lifted his head together with Fang Xingjian. He saw that the entire sky had been covered up by darkness, and the heavenly river that took up an endless amount of sky was also encompassed by a seething power, constantly pressing down on the heavenly river with a ferocious force. In outer space, Fang Xingjian lowered his head and looked at Erbian with great interest. Right now, he was holding the heavenly river in his hand. That omnipresent pressure was the power unleashed from the hand that was holding the heavenly river. Erbian, welcome to my world. Ulpian then turned to look. Fang Xingjian, whom he had just subdued, had unknowingly turned into a puff of green smoke, dissipating without a trace. At the next moment, Fang Xingjian's palm contracted abruptly, and the silver river was instantly compressed. A palm print that was several 10,000 lis in size appeared in the sky. When did this happen? The immortal child, who was in Fang Xingjian's body, looked at the battle in astonishment. However, even he could only see the illusory arts that the two of them had performed. Has it turned into a showdown with illusory arts? Could it be that Fang Xingjian is able to suppress or even defeat Erbian just by relying on illusory arts? Seeing that the heavenly river was shrinking bit by bit under the pressure from the huge palm, Erbian did not seem nervous at all. He merely looked at Fang Xingjian, who had placed him in the center of the palm, and said calmly, "Humans always think that what they see is reality. However, what is the truth? Humans are just an extremely weak life form. What we see is merely the reflection of electromagnetic waves. Regardless of whether it is the starry sky that is millions and millions of light years away, or our companions who are very close to us, what humans see is merely the past. Humans have never really been able to come into contact with the present and grasp the present. What are you trying to say?" Fang Xingjian frowned and exerted force with his palm once again. The heavenly river seemed to have shrunk to 1/10 of its original size. What we see has never been reality, just like what we are seeing now. As Erbian spoke, there seemed to be a rumbling sound ringing out in void space. Fang Xingjian's palm shattered, and the silver river expanded out rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a cube that had a length, width, and height of several tens of kilometers. Outside the cube, there was only darkness. It seemed to be absolute nothingness, a place that was even more nothingness than the universe's vacuum and dark regions. The heavenly river that Erbian had taken the form of was trapped in this cube that was formed from nothingness. The pressure from earlier had been transmitted out from this stretch of nothingness. So that's how it is. Did he transfer me into a small world when he transferred space earlier? The small world that was created when he self-detonated earlier, the place that was called the Sword Realm. The heavenly river collided fiercely with a force that could topple mountains and overturn seas, shatter continents, and break the Alps and Himalayas. The heavenly river burst out with a power that was comparable to the Himalayas. However, even with such a terrifying power, it was still unable to smash through the surrounding nothingness. It was as if this place could not be moved in the slightest. It's useless. This is a barrier between two worlds. Even you, who has grasped spatial control, won't be able to break through it with brute force, Fang Xingjian said calmly. Meanwhile, I'll be able to wear you down bit by bit. Erbian did not reply Fang Xingjian directly. Instead, he took the form of the silver river and smashed out time and time again toward the surrounding nothingness. Each collision was comparable to the collision of asteroids. The continental shelves shattered, and the surging powers rebounded to and fro, stirring up the entire heavenly river into a state of chaos. The immortal child looked at the scene before him with a grim countenance. He was astonished by Urbion's powers. There probably aren't many in this world who have such a strong foundation. However, by the looks of it, he has really been trapped by Feng Xingjian's illusory arts. Is he going to win? As expected, in terms of a contest of illusory arts, Feng Xingjian is still stronger. Concurrently, tsunamis with a magnitude of over 30 kept on occurring in the heavenly river. Even if the world's strongest aircraft carrier were to come here, it would probably be torn into pieces instantly. As the heavenly river collided time and time again, the tsunamis became increasingly stronger. Urbion's voice rang out once again. I've said it before. What humans can see will forever be the past. Only by grasping the present will we be able to grasp the past and the future. At the next moment, the surrounding darkness started to shatter. Many cracks appeared on the surface of the darkness, and piercing light shone out from the cracks. A deafening rumble rang out. All the darkness was instantly shattered, and piercing sunlight gushed out. There was no longer any endless darkness or small world. What they could see was only endless light and heat. There were high temperatures of over 100,000 degrees Celsius everywhere, and every inch of space was filled up with plasma. The two of them were clearly inside the sun. The immortal child in Feng Xingjian's body was stunned. Inside the sun. So that's how it is. Has it been an illusory art from the beginning to the end? Feng Xingjian made use of the pressure inside the sun to disguise it as the pressure from a small world, borrowing the powers of the sun to go up against Urbion's powers. Does this mean that Feng Xingjian's illusory arts are still above Urbion's, and he still has the upper hand? If that's the case, Urbion, who is encompassed by the illusory arts, is still unable to break out of this situation. Chapter 9:57. Just as the immortal child was thinking about this, the powers that Urbion had gathered from the celestial river burst forth with explosive force. This was an earth-shattering attack. The celestial river that Urbion had turned into could destroy an entire continent with just a casual attack. However, now that it was stirring back and forth, accumulating powers before unleashing them, it was more than 10 times more terrifying than before. What was even more terrifying was that this explosive power did not radiate out in all directions. Instead, it turned into a huge silver dragon that connected the heavens and the earth, gushing out toward Feng Xingjian. The immortal child exclaimed in astonishment. What? He's discovered us? How is that possible? His illusory arts should be weaker than Feng Xingjian's. Otherwise, how could he have been brought up to the sun? Concurrently, the huge silver dragon instantly engulfed Feng Xingjian. Wherever it passed by, the sun's flames would be extinguished, and countless miniature black holes would appear in space from the distortions. 8 minutes later, when the sunlight from the sun reached Earth, everyone realized that the sun seemed to be slightly dimmer than before. On the surface of the sun, a black spot that was several 10,000 lis in size had spread out due to Urbion's attack. He had used his brute force to extinguish the sun's flames within a range of 10,000 lis, causing the entire space to become 99% vacuum. Behind this attack, Feng Xingjian stood in the dark vacuum, his entire body flashing with silver light. The two of them exchanged blows intensely, creating a dark area that was the size of a small planet within the sun. Feng Xingjian had no choice but to transform into the heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique's final form. What terrifying powers! The immortal child became even more nervous. If I had taken that attack head-on with my conjured physique, I would have died without a doubt. However, to think that Feng Xingjian's sword physique was able to fend it off. But he only chose to use this defense now. Could it be that it consumes a lot of energy? There's no way I can fight him head-on. Are we still going to compete in illusory arts? Just as the immortal child was assessing the situation, Fang Xingjian had just performed the complete form of the heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique. Although his cultivation had improved greatly, he could only maintain it for an hour. However, within this hour, he believed that Erbian would not be able to deal with him head-on. But he still couldn't help but look at Erbian on the other side of the darkness and said, "Have you learned it?" Sudden inspiration, Erbian said lightly, "It did take me a long time, but I've learned it." Hearing the conversation between the two, a bolt of lightning flashed through the immortal child's mind. He instantly understood. Is that so? Logically speaking, the immortal child's power and casting range are both greater than Fang Xingjian's, so his illusions should be better than Fang Xingjian's as well. At the very least, the range of his illusions should be far greater than Fang Xingjian's. That's a huge advantage. However, as Fang Xingjian has grasped the precognitive ability of sudden inspiration, he was able to determine if Erbian's location was real or fake through sudden inspiration. With that, he was able to suppress Erbian in terms of illusions. This is also the reason why Fang Xingjian was able to trick Erbian into the sun and even set up 3 layers of illusions, using the sun's powers to fight against Erbian. The immortal child felt cold sweat dripping down from his forehead. However, Erbian's talent has surpassed Fang Xingjian's expectations. Not only did he beat Fang Xingjian at his own game, but at the same time as he accumulated his powers, he was also secretly learning Fang Xingjian's sudden inspiration. In the end, he picked up sudden inspiration and even used it to find where Fang Xingjian's real body was. He then broke through the 3 layers of illusions of Uranus, the palm, and the sword realm in one go, and even hit Fang Xingjian's real body with the accumulated attacks. The immortal child felt as if he had taken a walk at the edge of a cliff. This monster is too terrifying. If it wasn't for Fang Xingjian's heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique, we'd all be dead from that earlier attack. From the moment he broke through Fang Xingjian's illusions, there was no longer any meaning in the showdown of illusions. It was because both parties had grasped illusions and sudden inspiration, possessing the ability to break through illusions. If they were to continue, it would just be endless probing with illusions. Are we going to get serious now? Concurrently, the huge silver dragon that had spread out kept on shrinking and becoming smaller. It instantly shrunk from a size that could cover up a continent to the size of a peninsula, then the size of a city, then the size of a lake. Finally, it turned into Erbian's original form, which was about the same size as Fang Xingjian's human form. Why did you retract the virtual image? The immortal child was slightly stunned. It was clear that Erbian, who possessed the virtual image, could keep on shifting himself. He could also easily spread his powers across a range of 10,000 lis. In the immortal child's opinion, there was no way he should give up on this. However, when he saw the sun's flames gradually encroaching on him and the shrinking dark vacuum, he immediately reacted. So that's how it is. If he were to keep on turning into a virtual image, he'd have to resist even more sun's flames. As the battlefield was in the sun, the larger the size, the more flames, heat, and radiation that he would have to resist in a unit of time. The amount of power depleted would be even greater. This was especially so for Erbian's Heavenly River virtual image, which occupied such a huge space. He would have to resist the heat energy that could vaporize the entire Earth's atmosphere at all times. What kind of depletion was this? Therefore, Erbian retracted the virtual image. To think that Fang Xingjian even thought of this. He didn't plan on using illusions to get rid of his opponent right from the start. The immortal child exhaled. Even if the illusions are broken, as long as he can drag the battlefield into the sun's interior, it would be equivalent to crippling his opponent's virtual image ability and instantly gaining the upper hand. From the looks of it, the sun's interior is really the best place for a duel in the entire galaxy. Next will be a head-on duel. There's no longer any meaning in probing with illusions. As the immortal child watched the battle, he suddenly felt extremely emotional. Erbian and Fang Xingjian were both unprecedentedly powerful in terms of talent, and battle experience. If he were to fight against either one of them, he would probably die without even knowing how he had died. At the next moment, Urbian's figure moved slightly. He distorted space and compressed the distance between them. He appeared before Fang Xingjian at superliminal speed and punched out. Right now, Urbian had retracted all of the Heavenly River virtual image back into his body. However, this definitely did not mean that his powers had weakened. It was just that the prowess of many of his remarkable abilities might not be as great as before. However, when all of his pure powers were gathered in his body, which was the size of an ordinary person, the performance of his powers in a unit of time was even more astonishing. Wherever his fist passed by, void space would distort and repel everything in its path. The entire space turned into darkness. Eventually, it struck Fang Xingjian's body, and all of the darkness encompassed Fang Xingjian's body. Chapter 958. Absolute darkness instantly engulfed Fang Xingjian's body completely like a black shock wave. Not only did it drown out his heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique, but it also extended out, creating a black passageway that was several tens of kilometers long. Wherever the darkness passed by, everything would be destroyed. Everything was completely crushed by this pure power. However, a hint of astonishment appeared on Urbian's face. It was because when photons and various other microscopic particles once again occupied the darkness, Fang Xingjian's silver body was revealed, completely unscathed. Even Urbian's full-powered punch was unable to deal any damage to his heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique. A soft sound rang out from Urbian's body, and at the next moment, it shattered into pieces due to the tremors from the reactionary forces. It was as if a great sandstorm had exploded and scattered out. The exploded body instantly reassembled and condensed, once again taking on Urbian's appearance. He looked at Fang Xingjian's body in slight astonishment. The structure of a neutron star. That's a physical structure that you're unable to destroy. As Fang Xingjian spoke, he moved and put his fingers together like a sword, slashing out toward Urbian. Urbian let out an explosive bellow, and the air currents that he exhaled were like strong white gales. The power brought about by his fist even formed a plasma cloud. Before their hands clashed, violent plasma flames and shock waves collided fiercely, eventually engulfing the two of them. However, they were unable to damage their bodies in the slightest. Regardless of whether it was Urbian or Fang Xingjian, both of their bodies' defenses had reached an unbelievable level. When the scorching solar wind brushed against their bodies, it was like a light breeze brushing past their faces, unable to deal any damage to their bodies in the slightest. At the next moment, his sword fingers slashed down, colliding fiercely with Fang Xingjian's fist. The distorted space intersected, and the absolute darkness domain spread out rapidly in all directions with the point where their hands collided as the center. Bang! Fang Xingjian's body suddenly flew out like a silver meteor, crossing a distance of thousands of kilometers. Urbian's body did not take a single step back, but his entire arm suddenly shattered, turning into a fine powder that scattered in the void. A moment later, it condensed again and reconnected to his body. Again, on the other side, Fang Xingjian laughed maniacally. He stepped on the void, and it was as if he was walking on the solidified space. He charged toward Urbian at a speed several hundred times faster than the speed of sound. Wherever he passed, countless sun flames were blown away. It was as if he had turned into a comet flying in the universe, colliding fiercely with Urbian. Boom! The darkness spread, and Fang Xingjian was once again sent flying backward. Urbian's body shattered again, but he reassembled it according to his will. It was clear that Urbian's power surpassed that of Fang Xingjian's, and he was able to send him flying time and time again. However, his body's toughness had yet to reach the level of the heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique. Each time they collided, his body would be shattered. The two of them turned into two streams of silver light, clashing back and forth in the sun. They were like two meteors that kept on colliding. Each collision would send forth in overwhelming darkness, causing a large area of the sun's surface to be covered in darkness. With each collision, Feng Xingjian would be sent flying, and Erbian's body would turn into dust. The body is just an illusion. I can reassemble a few million bodies like this at any moment. And how much power do you have? With such a powerful body, the depletion rate will definitely be astonishing. It's impossible for you to maintain it forever. Although he could perform spatial translocation to dodge his opponent's attacks, Erbian had no intention of dodging at all. He clashed against Feng Xingjian at full power time and time again. He wanted to take on Feng Xingjian head-on and increase the rate of depletion of his opponent's energy. Rumble. Feng Xingjian tapped out with a finger, and his sword finger tore through space, once again crushing Erbian's body into dust. He himself was also flung out a distance of several hundred kilometers by the repulsive force. With a flash, Erbian caught up to Feng Xingjian. His fist was encompassed by absolute darkness, and he punched out, hitting Feng Xingjian's back. Through the series of battles earlier, Erbian had become increasingly adept at reassembling his body. Usually, the moment his body was shattered, he would finish reassembling in the next thousandth of a second. He would then catch up to Feng Xingjian and send out a punch. Therefore, a silver figure could be seen darting to and fro within the sun, being attacked wildly by Erbian's fists. The myriad of fist shadows seemed to encompass every inch of space within Feng Xingjian's sword body. These two monsters. The immortal child watched the confrontation between the two of them with his eyes and mouth agape. He was extremely astonished. To think that Feng Xingjian's sword body is so powerful? The strength of these two people far surpasses the concept of Tier 5 and 6 of the divine level. It's even above Tier 7. It's just that their realms haven't reached that level yet. If such a confrontation were to happen on Earth, humanity would probably have perished several hundred times over. The battle between the two of them continued. With each punch, Erbian's body would shatter once. However, almost at the instant after he swung out his fist, his shattered body would reassemble once again. The speed at which his body reassembled was too fast, making it seem as if he had not shattered at all. Each time he struck out a punch, his body would tremble slightly and become blurry for a moment. However, it would return to normal in an instant, and he would strike out another punch on Feng Xingjian's body. Erbian's speed was far too fast, and the surrounding space was distorted into a mess. It made him and Feng Xingjian appear as if they had turned into long, twisting snakes. Right now, Erbian's speed was also extremely fast. He kept striking out punch after punch onto Feng Xingjian's body. It was as if he had turned into a myriad of silhouettes surrounding Feng Xingjian. If he was in a hurry, he could compress space and move at superluminal speed. However, his body speed had not really broken through to light speed. Right now, as he struck out punch after punch, the speed of each punch was over 1,000 times that of supersonic speed. Moreover, his fists were extremely heavy. Each punch seemed to carry the weight of Mount Tai, suppressing the space, extinguishing the sun's flames, and bringing about waves of absolute darkness. There were no techniques. To begin with, there was no true martial arts in this world, let alone any moves. Right now, what Erbian wanted to do was to use the most ferocious power and the fastest speed to beat his opponent to death. In fact, to be able to unleash such explosive speed and power was already a world-shaking martial art to begin with. When one's martial arts reached this stage, it was already meaningless to simply circulate one's strength and move. Rumble. Feng Xingjian's finger tapped on Erbian's fist, and their powers collided fiercely. However, this time around, Erbian's body trembled slightly and did not shatter. On the other hand, a crisp kacha sound rang out from Feng Xingjian's heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique, and a fine crack that was hard to see with the naked eye appeared. Unknowingly, an absolutely smooth mirror-like surface had already covered the surface of Erbian's body. He looked at his body, which was now exactly the same as Feng Xingjian's, and said calmly, Heaven connecting upper extremity sword physique? I've already learned it. Then you can go and die as well. Boom! Crimson red flame shock waves extended out from the soles of Urbian's feet as he took a step forward. Faced with Urbian's punch, a gleam flashed in Fang Xingjian's eyes as he shouted out inwardly, "Do it!" At this moment, a stream of light that could penetrate through the entire world extended out from Fang Xingjian's palm, eventually turning into a light sword that slashed out fiercely toward Urbian's body. The light was the White Emperor Zenith sword, and the sword was the instant sword. Chapter 959. The White Emperor Zenith sword was said to be the strongest divine equipment of the Holy Sea of Truth. It was forged from a piece of bone from the god of Truth's hand, and possessed an extremely strong prowess that could split the world apart. It was a legend among legends. After exchanging information with the immortal child, Fang Xingjian then found out about the White Emperor Zenith sword's true information. It was too long ago to know if this great divine weapon had come from the god of Truth. However, there was no doubt that it was very powerful. The White Emperor Zenith sword was formed from a total of 21 sections, and each section had a different amazing ability. The more sections were activated, the greater the prowess of the divine equipment. It was said that if all 21 sections were linked up, the prowess unleashed would be able to split the world apart and recreate the mortal world. However, in the history of the Holy Sea of Truth, there had never been anyone who could activate all 21 sections and unleash this divine equipment's prowess completely. Back then, the previous pope had ordered the three saints to hand the White Emperor Zenith sword to them, and also ordered them to hand it over to Fang Xingjian in the future, so that Fang Xingjian could stop the seventh onslaught. It was a pity that the three saints were unwilling to hand over the White Emperor Zenith sword. The sword was then split into three, and the three saints each took a portion of 7 sections. Right now, Fang Xingjian and the immortal child worked together and instantly unleashed a light path that was several 10,000 kilometers long. Fang Xingjian could even sense that there were 7 light spots lighting up in his body. They were the White Emperor Zenith sword's 7 sections, which were unleashed one after another. Fang Xingjian only felt that the power unleashed by the first section was not bad. However, when the power unleashed by the third section was unleashed, his countenance turned grim. When the power unleashed by the 7th section was unleashed, even Fang Xingjian could not help but be astonished. The White Emperor Zenith sword? The power unleashed by the 7 sections is already comparable to that of the Urbian. As expected of the number 1 divine equipment in this world for the past 10 million years. Sensing the power of the light sword in his hand, Fang Xingjian's battle intent seethed. As the light sword soared into space and pierced through countless solar flames, the two of them could sense waves of endless power gathering toward the light sword in void space. This was the power of the 7 nodes, White Emperor Zenith sword that the immortal child had grasped. It could communicate with void space and draw power from other parallel worlds. This meant that once the White Emperor Zenith sword was activated, its energy would never be depleted. The only problem was how much the user could control. As the White Emperor Zenith sword was unleashed, Fang Xingjian's instant sword was also unleashed. Ever since the sword formation, and the sword realm self-destructed at the same time, Fang Xingjian rebuilt his divine nation and rebuilt the sword realm. The 3 powers had gathered together. His sword realm was usually kept within his body, but once it was activated, it would expand and instantly overlap with the surrounding real world. The sword realm contained all of Fang Xingjian's sword arts powers. It could be said to be the culmination of all of Fang Xingjian's sword arts. With each sword slash, it could simultaneously possess the prowess of the instant sword, the light pursuit sword, the all-conquering sword, and the infiltrating void sword. Streams of cracks radiated out in all directions with Fang Xingjian's body as the center. The sword realm had opened up and a myriad of swords had descended. Fang Xingjian used this to activate the instant sword. Simultaneously, countless sword marks suddenly appeared in the surroundings of the White Emperor Zenith sword. moving along with the light sword's movements. It was as if the white Emperor Zenith's sword's every move was shattering the space incessantly. The white Emperor Zenith sword and the instant sword were activated at the same time. The powers of the immortal child and Fang Xingjian worked together. With a slash of the sword, it was as if the wind, water, earth, and fire had been re-established. The world was severed, and everything in the world was wiped out. However, the strange thing was that although the prowess of this sword attack was extremely great, Erbian's sudden inspiration did not sense any threat from it. It was as if he was looking at a person holding a watermelon knife. Even though the other party could stab him to death at the next moment, he did not sense any threat. If ordinary people were to sense such a feeling, they would definitely feel extremely twisted. However, Erbian possessed the sudden inspiration. Therefore, he believed in his feelings and continued with the power of this punch. The fist and sword light collided fiercely. Erbian's fist spread out absolute darkness, while the white Emperor Zenith sword crazily drew in the powers of other worlds. The white light that was released could melt any matter. Boom! One black and one white each took up a direction. After a single collision, they burst out explosively toward the left and right respectively. It was as if two worlds had collided fiercely together. Relying on the powers of the white Emperor Zenith sword's 7 sections, Fang Xingjian took on Erbian's attack head-on for the first time in history. They were evenly matched. However, just as the sword and the fist collided, the two gushes of powers that could annihilate all of humanity collided wildly, creating two worlds, one black and one white. A black sword mark was suddenly formed. It came out of nowhere, as if someone had cut open the space with a sword thousands of years ago. It came and went without a trace. When Ulpian sensed this sword, the sword mark had already engulfed him in an instant. Throughout the entire process, Erbian's sudden inspiration had not sensed any threat or abnormalities beforehand. It was engulfed by the sword mark instantly and disappeared without a trace. With Erbian's disappearance, the black void suddenly started to dissipate. Within 1,000th of a second, it was completely engulfed by the white Emperor Zenith sword. Seeing that Erbian had disappeared, the immortal child asked in bewilderment, "What's wrong?" Even he did not understand what had happened with that sword attack earlier. He's gone to another universe. He can forget about ever coming back. Hearing Fang Xingjian's reply and recalling the earlier scenes, a series of memories flashed past his mind at lightning speed. He suddenly reacted that earlier was the instant sword, so that's how it is. I understand now. The immortal child had really understood. In the series of battles earlier, Fang Xingjian had been slashing out this sword attack to win. Even with the white Emperor Zenith sword's energy propulsion, the instant sword can only slash out a sword mark that is the size of a normal person's. This sword attack is too powerful, absolutely powerful, to an unbelievable extent. Therefore, the amount of energy required surpasses that of any other moves. Even though the white Emperor Zenith sword draws out the universe's energy, it can only slash out a sword mark that is the size of a normal person's. And the effect of this sword attack is to tear through void space. No, it's not to tear through space, but to suppress it, sending Erbian to another universe. When one attains a breakthrough to the divine level, one can see the big from the small. The end of the microscopic world is beyond space-time, a place that exceeds the concept of time and space. It's a passageway to other universes. The instant sword is a sword attack that transcends space-time, breaking through the restraints of space-time and slashing open the quantum passageway at the end of space-time. Chapter 960. When the instant sword is activated at full power, it can break through the restrictions of space-time and banish people to other universes. The prowess of this sword attack is astonishing. However, because it's not meant to kill, but to banish, Erbian's sudden inspiration did not sense any threat beforehand. At this moment, the immortal child finally understood the series of interlinked battle tactics that Fang Xingjian had used. First, he would pull the other party into the sun through illusory arts. Then, he would force the other party to shrink his body through the sun's environment, turning into the size of an ordinary person. He would then use the heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique to fight against the other party head-on, forcing Urbian to transform into a similarly powerful body to fight. The heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique was indeed extremely powerful. However, the greatest weakness of this body that was similar to a neutron star was that it was unable to move at light speed. Therefore, Urbian's body could be covered by the instant sword, and his speed was not enough to make it hard for the instant sword physique to aim at him. Moreover, the instant sword had already transcended space-time, coming and going unknowingly. Now, coupled with the fact that it did not have any killing intent and was unable to sense any threat, this sword attack became traceless. There was no way to dodge or predict it in advance, making it a sword attack that would definitely hit its target once it was unleashed. The immortal child suddenly felt his will tremble, and there seemed to be a chill rising in his heart. What a terrifying sword technique and a terrifying person. This instant sword will definitely hit its target once it's unleashed. The only way to fend it off is to never reveal my true form before Feng Xingjian. I'll always have to disperse most of my powers instead of appearing as one. However, thinking of how Feng Xingjian had relied on the White Emperor Zenith sword's output to slash out a sword mark that was the size of an ordinary person, the immortal child exhaled. Thankfully, this sword attack has depleted too much energy. Without the White Emperor Zenith sword, its threat will be greatly reduced. Concurrently, the white light also gradually dissipated from void space. The White Emperor Zenith sword shrank back into Feng Xingjian's body. "We've finally won. Are we going back?" the immortal child asked. Feng Xingjian, however, frowned. "Did you feel it, the power of the sudden inspiration? The future has not been changed. I also did not feel the call of the original world." The immortal child was also confused. Did we miss something? Just as Feng Xingjian was pondering, two beams of sword light suddenly burst out from his eyes. Countless cracks radiated out in all directions with his body as the center. The sword realm descended, slicing through everything. At the same time, he executed the instant sword once more, slashing out at the void before him. However, even though Feng Xingjian had fully activated the power of the sword realm in his body, it was still too late. An arm with absolutely smooth skin suddenly reached out from void space. In an instant, a sword slashed out, and a black sword mark wiped out the other party's palm, wiping out the sword mark on the palm. This was the effect of Feng Xingjian unleashing his full power without the help of the White Emperor Zenith sword. However, very quickly, the palm once again grew out. The remaining arm continued to reach out, followed by the other hand. The two hands seemed as if they were tearing through void space, tearing out a passageway and leaping out from it. Right now, after unleashing the instant sword at full power, Feng Xingjian's powers were almost completely depleted. Only the power of the White Emperor Zenith sword could be activated once again. However, this time around, Urbian did not given the chance to continue unleashing the Emperor Zenith sword. He punched out fiercely onto Feng Xingjian's chest. Feng Xingjian, who had depleted all of his powers, was unable to continue maintaining the heaven-connecting upper extremity sword physique. He was smashed into dust by this punch, revealing the immortal child within. Roar! The immortal child abruptly continued to activate the White Emperor Zenith sword. Just as he was about to perform divine arts, he discovered that Urbian's hand had opened up as if he was holding up the sky. With a grab, Urbian had been crushed into a small white ball and held in his hand. Before him, Feng Xingjian was slowly reassembling. His conjured physique appeared to be half illusory and half real, extremely weak. The immortal child looked at Urbian in astonishment. "You have become stronger." Sensing the power that was suppressing him, the immortal child was unable to even communicate with the power of divine arts. It was as if Urbian's palm was in another universe, and the immortal child was unable to even extend out his martial will. Right now, Feng Xingjian seemed to have gone through a complete transformation. Each and every one of his actions seemed to bring about a prowess that could destroy the world and recreate the mortal world. He had defeated the immortal child with a single claw and suppressed the White Emperor Zenith's sword. However, Urbion's eyes were still filled with indifference. He stood quietly in void space, looking at Feng Xingjian as if he was looking at an ant. This time around, I still have to thank you. I've learned a lot from my experiences outside space-time. There's no concept of time and space there, and I don't know how long I've been there either. It's so long that it feels like an eternity. Feng Xingjian's countenance was extremely grim. Right now, Urbion gave him a hair-raising feeling. His sudden inspiration's warning went off wildly, as if several hundred decibels of bells were ringing in his mind. There had never been a moment where Feng Xingjian had felt such a sense of danger. The sense of threat that Urbion was giving him right now was even stronger than the sense of danger that all the living creatures he had felt since he was born added together. He asked, "You're able to traverse parallel worlds?" "That's right," Urbion said calmly. "I've already grasped the power to traverse universes. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. With this power, I won't just be able to save the Earth in this universe. I'll also be able to save all the parallel worlds, all of Earth, and all of humanity." Hearing Urbion's words, the immortal child's eyes were filled with intense despair. To begin with, Urbion was already unbelievably powerful. Even when the two of them joined forces, they had no hope of defeating him head-on. They were unable to wipe out Urbion's powers. In the end, they had to rely on Feng Xingjian's instant sword to banish Urbion out of this universe. However, the immortal child had never expected that even though they had banished Urbion out of this universe and beyond space-time, Urbion would still be able to find his way back. What kind of terrifying will was this? To be able to traverse different parallel universes. Did this not mean that Feng Xingjian would be able to arrive at different pasts and futures? The immortal child could not imagine how powerful a person like this would be. However, Urbion raised his head and swept his indifferent gaze across void space. It was as if he was looking at the myriad of worlds in the universe. Right now, I can see countless worlds before me. My eyes can see through the past and see through the future. Those are countless lines and points that are constantly changing. With each action and each change, countless worlds are disappearing and countless worlds are being born. I can see the destruction of a universe and the birth of each world. There has never been a moment where I've been able to grasp the present and foresee the future so clearly. Right now, I'm invincible. At the sight of this scene, Feng Xingjian suddenly smiled. "No, Urbion, haven't you realized it yet? Right now, you've already lost." Chapter 961. Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, Urbion was slightly stunned. He frowned, and countless thoughts seemed to flash in his eyes in an instant. It could be said that the number of things he had thought about in this instant was more than what humanity had thought over the past 100 years. It was these thoughts that made him seem to have understood something. The corners of his lips curled up into a hint of smile. "You think that I'll definitely fail?" "That's right." Feng Xingjian's eyes were filled with calmness, as if he could not see anything. He said indifferently, "It's impossible for you to succeed in your goal. This is obvious. Therefore, your future has been a dead end from the very beginning. The faster your strength increases, the closer you'll be to the end. It can be said that among the 13 armies, the Silver Army is the only dead end. Our victory has yet to be decided. The competition of strength has ended. But the battle of beliefs has only just begun. In this battle, you'll definitely lose. It's because from the very beginning, your strength has been built on nothing." Urbion did not reply. Instead, he suddenly smiled and said, "No matter what the outcome is, you won't be able to see it. Moreover, with my current cultivation, who in this world can stop me?" Clearly, Urbion understood what Feng Xingjian meant. However, he did not agree with it at all. Instead, he was very confident in his current strength. As he spoke, Feng Xingjian's body suddenly shattered, turning into countless particles that scattered in void space. At the next moment, they were completely engulfed by countless microscopic black holes, disappearing completely. Right now, before Ulpian, Feng Xingjian was not even able to hold on for a single thought. He instantly turned into ashes, and there was no trace of him left. At the sight of this scene, the immortal child revealed an expression of despair. Even Feng Xingjian could not hold on for a single round before Urbian. What else could he do? This time around, he had clearly failed in his attempt to clear the trial. Moreover, it was a crushing defeat, with no hope of victory at all. Urbian looked at the immortal child in his hand and raised his eyebrows slightly. A white sword of light was slowly extracted from the immortal child's will. The twitching of the white Emperor Zenith's sword elicited the immortal child's agonizing cries. He had nurtured the white Emperor Zenith's sword in his martial will for so many years, and this astonishing divine equipment had long since become one with his will. Now that it was forcefully drawn out by Urbian, it was as if one's blood vessels were being drawn out from one's body bit by bit. The pain was far beyond an ordinary person's imagination. However, Urbian did not care about these. With a single thought, a loud rumble rang out, and the immortal child's martial will instantly shattered into pieces. A pure white light that was like the first beam of light in the world appeared before Urbian. What a good divine weapon! Letting you use this sword is truly a waste of time. As he spoke, Urbian reached out and grabbed toward the white Emperor Zenith sword. No! Seeing that Urbian wanted to control the white Emperor Zenith sword, the immortal child let out an enraged bellow and instantly squeezed out all of his potential. The martial will, which was originally extremely weak and seemed to have shattered into pieces of glass, instantly gathered together once again, turning into a pure white human figure. It was the immortal child's original appearance. At the next moment, he casually drew out 3 light spots, and 3 waves of majestic power came gushing down from void space. The immortal child had clearly gone all out, instantly performing 3 divine arts. As one of the 3 strongest people in the holy sea of truth, the immortal child's strength far surpassed that of ordinary guardian kings. In the past, darkness aberration and death-revealing heavenly eyes had each grasped a supreme divine art. However, the divine arts that the immortal child had grasped were above those of the other 2. White drill, 128 stances. 128 white dragons charged out from Urbian's body. To think that Urbian's powers had suddenly gone berserk, turning into 128 white dragons to attack him. Pure white kiss. A layer of white membrane encompassed Urbian's body. Wherever it passed by, all matter and what would be separated, turning all energy and matter into pure dead matter. Court of Truth. Urbian's body suddenly disappeared. At the same time that he was attacked by the first 2 divine arts, he was also dragged into a stretch of pure white space. 13 white figures surrounded him and bellowed, "Receive your judgment, sinner." Right now, the immortal child performed 3 supreme divine arts at one go. Each of them was in no way weaker than darkness aberration and death-revealing heavenly eyes. In an instant, he displayed a power that could allow him to dominate over the world. The Court of Truth is able to draw out the demons in the enemy's heart and create 13 new personalities. It will only end when there's only one person left after they kill each other. Even if I can't kill Urbian, I'll at least be able to escape for some time. A few pieces of information flashed past in his mind at lightning speed. With a flash, the immortal child grabbed out toward the white Emperor Zenith's sword that was floating before him. However, just as his palm was about to come into contact with the white Emperor Zenith's sword, the immortal child's body instantly came to a standstill. No, it was not just the immortal child's body that had come to a standstill. Instead, the entire world seemed to have come to a standstill. The blazing sun's flames turned into solidified plasma, and all the microparticles under his feet froze in void space, stopping all their reactions. One could even see the immortal child's savage expression and nervous gaze. It was as if he had been stuck in that moment forever. Right now, all matter and energy in the world seemed to have come to a standstill. There was only one matter, or one person who was not affected by this standstill. The immortal child's feet stepped out from the court of truth slowly. Then, with a slight tremble, he released the white training 128 stances and pure white kiss divine arts attacks. Amidst the world that had come to a standstill, one could only see him walking toward the white Emperor Zenith sword step by step. Then he reached out and grabbed the white Emperor Zenith sword. Almost at the instant he grabbed it, two streams of white light burst out from his eyes. It was not just his eyes. White light also kept on bursting out from his eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. This power, excellent. It's even better than what I imagined. The 7 sections of the white Emperor Zenith sword that the immortal child had grasped had the power to draw out energy from other universes directly. Its limits were unfathomable, and it depended on the user's control. Earlier on, Fang Xingjian had been able to exchange blows with Erbian using the white Emperor Zenith sword without being at a disadvantage. Right now, after Erbian had grasped the white Emperor Zenith sword, his powers had reached an unbelievable level. When the world regained its flow once again, the immortal child saw that everything before him had turned into a stretch of pure white. The white light was pure white, but it did not have any piercing feeling. It was like a piece of white paper that gradually encompassed the entire sun, as if wanting to engulf this star that was 100,000 times bigger than Earth completely. Right now, Erbian felt that his powers will seem to be growing endlessly, advancing toward an unimaginable realm. Chapter 962. Even if he did not do anything, his powers would continue to advance until he reached the limits of the white Emperor Zenith sword. However, at the end of the day, his powers were his means. His true objective was still humanity's justice. He wanted to turn the entire Earth and the entire human world into his heavenly kingdom, wiping out all sins and evil. At the next moment, his gaze pierced through void space and looked toward the endless future. The sun, universe, and void space before him all disappeared. It was as if he had once again stepped onto the streets of Earth. There were people from Earth walking to and fro on the streets. There were busy streets, lively shops, and countless flashing lights. Why? Can't wait to see the future? Erbian turned and noticed that Fang Xingjian, who was dressed in black robes, was floating next to him like an illusion, looking at him with an amused expression. Erbian's brows raised up slightly, and a gleam flashed in his eyes. It was as if he had seen various images from the past. Heart Sword Path? To think that you still have the excess energy to do something like this during a battle? He instantly saw through the origin of this image. It was a sword seed that Fang Xingjian had planted in Erbian's heart using his unparalleled heart sword path. This sword seed had been born from Erbian's obsession, which was the justice in his heart. It was an unparalleled heart demon and not an ordinary thought. However, after taking a glance, Erbian did not pay it any more attention. It was because he knew that the so-called heart sword path and sword seed were merely a mutated thought of his. As long as he did not care about it, it would disappear before long. On the contrary, if he were to persist on it and compete with his thoughts, the other party would continue to grow stronger. In the end, this was just another thought of his. The more he thought about it, the stronger it would become. On the contrary, if he did not care about it, it would slowly be forgotten. His gaze turned toward the earth before him. This was one of Earth's many futures. Right now, Erbian's cultivation was extremely high, and a single thought could cause the world to crumble. His will could even penetrate the past and future, allowing him to see the scenes of countless parallel universes. Right now, what he was seeing was one of Earth's futures. With a slight thought, his will scanned the entire Earth and then frowned. Fang Xingjian smiled. How is it? Are you not satisfied? This Earth developed according to your original plan. There is no need to worry about food and clothing, and transportation and housing were all solved. But there are still people killing, people stealing, people committing crimes. Erbian frowned and said coldly, My power is enough to monitor everyone. I just need to monitor everyone and stop them from committing crimes. At the next moment, the world before him shattered. As Urbian's thoughts changed, a new fork appeared in the universe, and a brand new future was born. It was a future where all humans were monitored by Urbian. The scene changed, and Urbian arrived in this new future. He stood on a floating continent and gazed at the entire Earth. At this moment, on Earth, the sky had been occupied by densely packed floating cities, and the entire land was filled with towering steel jungles. The human population had already exceeded 100 billion, but with Urbian's power, they still did not have to worry about food and clothing. However, wherever Urbian's thoughts swept past, there would be people committing suicide almost every day. They would then be stopped by Urbian in the process of committing suicide. There would be people committing crimes every day, but they would be stopped by Urbian before they could commit the crime. Countless people raised their heads and looked at the sky, cursing at Urbian crazily. There were protests against Urbian everywhere on the internet. People cursed him, feared him, and fought for freedom. Almost every day, there would be people who would break down and become lunatics because they could not withstand the complete surveillance for 24 hours. Even more people indulged in desires and enjoyment, unable to extricate themselves. Without the worries of food, clothing, housing, and transportation, almost only 1% of people were still fighting. The entire human society seemed to be extremely decadent, and they hated Urbian, who had brought all of this. Next to Urbian, Feng Xingjian smiled. You failed again. Humans are just that stupid. You gave them a heaven-like life, but they are asking for the freedom to return to hell. Are you able to change their stupid instincts? Urbian did not say anything. With a single thought, he made another change. This time around, Urbian did not continuously monitor everyone for 24 hours. Instead, he implanted a thought seal in everyone's minds that they were not allowed to harm others. All humans were implanted with this thought seal by Urbian the moment they were born, and they were not allowed to harm others for the rest of their lives. Therefore, the timeline changed once again, and a different future was born. With a slight thought from Urbian, he arrived on Earth in the future. In the current human society, everyone had become an existence that absolutely abided by the law. Everyone lived according to the rules set by Urbian. No one killed, no one robbed, and no one even jumped the queue. The streets were always clean. No one littered or spat on the ground. Even when a fire broke out, everyone lined up according to the order of the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled. In this world, the rules were engraved in everyone's minds, and they were even above life itself. However, Urbian did not reveal a satisfied smile. Instead, there was a hint of gloominess in his eyes. Feng Xingjian laughed. Haha, could it be that you're afraid? Aren't you willing to look at the future? Urbian did not say anything. He merely stretched out his hand and streaked across the air. It was as if he had pressed an acceleration switch, and the entire world started to move at an unbelievable speed. In the blink of an eye, several decades passed by. Right now, the Earth was filled with a deathly atmosphere. There was no one walking on the streets, because any activities that could frighten or cause a collision to the passersby had been stopped. There was only quiet music playing on the television stations. All television programs that could cause conflict had been stopped. In the shops, only the same type of clothing was being sold. It was because any differences in clothing would be considered a form of inequality and discrimination. Everyone was doing work on an equal footing, and any competition that could cause harm to others was prohibited. There was no one who studied, researched, or did any work that could help humanity progress. It was because ordinary people would not be able to surpass a single thought from Urbian, even if they worked hard for a lifetime. No matter what kind of discoveries or creations they made, they would always realize that Urbian had already achieved them. The entire human government was under Urbian's control. He was responsible for the maintenance of all machinery, transportation, housing, and many other things, 24 hours a day. Correcting the past, but is that really all? Feng Xingjian, who was next to Urbian, smiled. With a wave of his hand, the two of them passed through countless spaces and suddenly appeared in a living room. A young man was lying on the sofa. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, and there was only numbness left in his eyes. Just as he was about to starve to death, a stream of silver light suddenly appeared. It swept up a nutritional fluid and injected it into the young man's body, maintaining his life. Under the supervision of Urbian's will, no one in the world would starve to death. However, even though he had been injected with nutritional fluid, the young man still had a look of despair on his face. There was no sign of any desire to continue living. Chapter 963. Feng Xingjian said coldly, "You think that justice is the truth of the universe? That's simply the greatest lie in the entire multivariate universe." He looked at Urbian and said word by word, "The so-called justice is just a comfort zone for humans. The real universe is incomparably cruel. It requires cunning and hypocrisy to ally with one's opponents, to cruelly slaughter and exterminate other species, to greedily and coldly devour other lives. Humans will forever need to fight against their own weakness, guilt, shame, and unease. Only then can they survive in this world. And justice is just like laziness. It's a comfort zone that weak humans set for themselves. How happy would it be to be pure and naive? How easy would it be to trust everyone without using one's brain? How happy would it be to not have to sacrifice anyone, to not have to endure guilt, pain, and conflict? There would be no need to kill, no need to fight, no need to endure the betrayal of friends and family, no need to argue, no quarrel, no fight, no struggle, no need to compromise. The entire world would become just and kind people. How easy would that be? How happy would it be? Without using one's brain, one could just eat and wait for death, living in peace and stability. But can such humans still be called humans? Is there still a need for such creatures and such a society to exist? A pig that can live on like this is simply an insult to all humans in the past. Urbian, justice will forever be just a comfort zone. It's like a sweet candy. It's incomparably wonderful, enough to make anyone feel at ease and relaxed. But if one blindly covets the sweetness of this candy, it will only poison the entire species to death. Feng Xingjian looked at Urbian and said word by word, "You've set down all the rules, forbidding all actions that will cause harm. There are no conflicts, no disputes, no struggles. That is equivalent to forbidding all competition between humans. No battles, no killing, no competition, and no conflicts. What's the point of living like this? Everyone can only live under your rules and will never be able to take a step further. This is because your rules don't leave a path for them to advance. You're just raising them like pigs. Their efforts are destined to be worthless. Any research, any struggle will not bring about any change in status, wealth, or power, because their lifetime of hard work cannot compare to a single thought of yours." Urbian sighed as he watched the withering humans who had almost lost their drive to advance under his protection. "You said that I've sealed their path to ascension, so I'll just give it to them again." In an instant, the entire world changed, and a new possibility appeared in the future of Earth. All humans were still implanted with the thought stamp, but this time, Urbian gave them the path to wealth and power. As long as they worked hard according to the standards he set, they would be promoted every year based on their performance. There was no need for scheming, no need for backstabbing, no need for any background or unspoken rules. All they could do was work hard and achieve good results under the rules set by Urbian. Only then would they be promoted. Looking at the thriving Earth, which seemed to be bustling with activity everywhere, Feng Xingjian revealed a hint of a cold smile. "You've split out a portion of your duties and handed them over to them." Initially, Urbian maintained the entire Earth's operations. However, in order to provide work for humans, he split out a portion of the simplest tasks. For example, clearing rubbish, planting crops, assembling equipment, planting greenery. "How boring," Feng Xingjian said with a cold smile. Although these labors were meaningless to Urbian, through such labors, everyone achieved different results. There were still differences between groups of people. Everyone's wealth and power would gradually start to differ based on their results every year. After all, they were not clones. As long as a group of people worked together, there would naturally be a first and last place. The distribution of wealth and power had started. Urbian frowned. His hand slipped, and another 100 years passed. Right now, the entire society on Earth once again became lifeless. Fang Xingjian smiled. Seems like you failed again. You've set the rules and made them compete according to the rules. However, when everything goes according to the rules, the people who get rich first will only have more and more advantages. Human history has proven this point countless times. The people who get rich first will have an absolute advantage. Unless the rules are broken, it's impossible to surpass them. It's the same for this zoo of yours. Those who get first place in the first few years will have more power and wealth than others. Therefore, they will have more subordinates, more tools, and more resources. This makes it impossible for the latecomers to surpass them through regular means. The only way is to break the rules and overtake them through corners. However, this is something you're not allowed to do. The only way is to redistribute the wealth. In human history, this is called rebellion, but you can't do this. You can only keep opening up new areas of competition and new areas of work, creating many new people who get rich first. However, without the adjustment of violent and bloody revolutions, the solidification of social classes is inevitable. The humans at the bottom will eventually lose hope and will never be able to rise up again. When the water is too clear, there will be no fish. Absolute rules will only erase the motivation for society to move forward. Urbian, do you still not understand? Unless all humans are turned into you, human history will only continue to move forward in a spiral. There's no such thing as an eternal paradise. It's because the universe we live in is cruel to begin with. Evil and justice will always coexist. What's the difference between your absolute justice and evil? That's just a comfort zone that you've created for yourself. Just because the actions of justice give you a comfortable feeling, just because you like justice, you think that they're right? If you wish to create that kind of delusional country, you'll have to be able to rewrite the laws of the entire multivariate universe. Otherwise, he'll forever be a toy in your hands and will return to his original state after leaving your existence. Fang Xingjian slowly walked up to Urbian, looked at him, and said coldly, "Your paradise is like a spring. Right now, you've forcefully squeezed it up, but you're unable to stop it from returning to its original state." Urbian raised his head and looked at Fang Xingjian, saying coldly, "I don't believe you." At the next moment, the earth before Fang Xingjian changed once again, and a new future appeared. All sorts of new policies, new technologies, and new futures kept on appearing before Urbian. However, he was still unable to create the paradise that he wanted. Gradually, many cracks appeared on Urbian's body. Similar cracks appeared on Fang Xingjian's body, and he seemed to be faintly discernible, like he would disappear at any moment. However, he continued to smile. The 13 armies' powers come from the ring's energy, and it's the same for you. However, the Silver Army's powers come from justice. It's true that this gives you powerful abilities, but it's also destined to be the worst foundation. It's because justice is a contradictory thing to begin with. And now, when you start to doubt your own justice, when your righteous heart is distorted, will you still be able to continue using this power? Urbian, your powers have been built upon nothingness from the very beginning. He's just a flower in the mirror, a moon in the water. Chapter 964. Kacha Kacha, sounds kept ringing out. More and more cracks appeared on Urbian and Fang Xingjian's bodies at the same time. Countless fragments peeled off from their bodies, as if they were statues that had been crushed by a huge force. The scenery around them changed rapidly. As Urbian's thoughts swept past, future after future appeared before them rapidly. However, none of them could satisfy Urbian, and with each failure, Urbian's body became more and more unstable. Very soon, more than half of his body was shattered. Have I failed? My pursuit, my belief, Has it always been impossible? Perhaps Urbian had considered that his goal was difficult to achieve or even impossible in the past. However, it was only an estimation and not a certainty. However, at this moment, ever since he was born in this world, he had never understood this world so well. He had never seen this world so clearly before. It was precisely because he was unprecedentedly powerful that he understood very clearly that the goal he was pursuing was impossible. His gaze swept across the future, countless years in the future. His brain was carrying out millions of social modifications at every moment. However, no matter how he tried, no matter how he changed, or how hard he tried, he was unable to create a harmonious society that could maintain human autonomy in nature. Kingdom of Heaven. It's impossible. Urbian's body kept shattering. In the end, only his head was left. As for the sword seed, nurtured by his obsession and the illusion of Feng Xingjian, they had long disappeared. Two streams of tears flowed down from Urbian's eyes. This was his despair towards the world, and the sorrow he felt towards the entire universe. If there really is a creator of the entire universe, then when our universe was created, its nature had already been determined. Cruel, cold, heartless. It can't be changed. Urbian slowly closed his eyes. He suddenly felt tired. His strength was getting weaker and weaker, and his will was getting more and more fatigued. The countless attempts had exhausted his heart to the extreme. Let's take a nap. Urbian closed his eyes, and his mind instantly turned gray. It was as if he was going to turn into ashes and disappear without a trace in the next moment. However, his eyes suddenly opened again, and a strong unwillingness flashed through them. Why? Why can't the essence of the universe be justice and kindness? God, do you really enjoy watching us kill each other? At this moment, a soft voice rang out in his mind. They were like the breeze, like the drizzle, like the whispers of a woman, like the whispers of the horizon. Join us, join us, join us. This is your only hope. This is your only hope. This is your only hope. Come on, come on, come on, countless men, women, old and young. It was as if the voices of all living things in the universe were shouting in Urbian's heart. Urbian felt as if his body had entered an extremely warm place. Countless little hands were caressing the surface of his body, making him want to sink into oblivion. No! Suddenly, he reacted. His eyes opened abruptly, but they were covered by a stretch of pure white. Stop! On the battlefield of the sun, the immortal child could only see Urbian's figure flash and disappear without a trace. Feng Xingjian had gone to another timeline. As Urbian disappeared, the seething flames of the sun once again surrounded him from all directions at the next moment. Usually, with the immortal child's abilities, he would have sufficient power to escape even if he was in the sun. However, he had been seriously injured by Urbian and was extremely weak. How could he still remain unscathed in the sun? Regardless of whether it was the intense radiation, electromagnetic waves, high temperatures, or the sun's super-strong gravitational force, all of them were enough to refine him to death. Sensing that his martial will was getting increasingly weaker and that it would collapse at any moment, the immortal child let out a breath. I can only use that. Damn it. I haven't even attained a breakthrough to Tier 6 of the divine level. As he spoke, streams of white light spots kept on appearing around the immortal child. It was as if he was going to perform some kind of divine art. Just then, a stream of light flashed by and darted into the immortal child's martial will. Right now, the immortal child's weak martial will made him unable to resist at all. He could only watch as this scene happened. What the hell is that? It's the White Emperor Zenith sword? After the White Emperor Zenith sword darted into his will, there was another flash before his eyes, and Urbian appeared once again. However, not only was his body unscathed, but he had also turned into a stretch of pure white. He had white hair, white eyes, and white skin. His eyes were filled with indifference, and no emotions or thoughts could be seen. Seeing that Urbian had returned, the immortal child's heart skipped a beat, and he fell into despair again. F asterisk CK. I thought that he had left. To think that he F asterisk King came back. Do I have such a great feud with you? He had almost died and almost survived. Now, it seemed like he was going to die again. The repeated torment caused the immortal child to curse uncontrollably. However, at the next moment, he realized that Erbian's current situation seemed to be a little off. Feng Xingjian did not seem to care about him at all. After throwing a glance at him, Feng Xingjian's gaze stopped on his hand, looking at the silver ring on his finger. It was a silver ring that he had obtained after coming to this world. When Erbian saw this ring, he seemed to be slightly stunned. Then he disappeared without saying a word. This silver ring had been with Erbian ever since he came to this universe, allowing him to use a portion of the Silver Army's powers. However, he had his own power system to begin with. Therefore, he had not studied this ring's powers. It was just that this ring did not seem to be formed from ordinary materials. It was in a state between being illusory and real. Even now, it was not damaged in the slightest. What the hell? The immortal child was slightly stunned, not understanding what Feng Xingjian had done at all. At the next moment, his countenance changed drastically. That's not right. The aura on Erbian's body earlier. That's the aura of the God of universal truth. As one of the three saints of the Holy See of Truth, Erbian had directly received the God of universal truth's divine arts. Therefore, he was naturally very familiar with the God of universal truth's aura. What he had sensed from Erbian earlier was the same feeling that the God of universal truth gave him. Just then, Erbian's voice suddenly rang out from the silver ring, which had been silent all this while. Don't just stand there. Leave quickly. Chapter 965. On Earth, after the great battle between Erbian and Feng Xingjian, over 5 months had passed. Due to the extremely strong gravitational force in the sun and the prolonged battle at light speed and superluminal speed, to Erbian and Feng Xingjian, it had only been a short moment. But to the people on Earth, 5 months had passed. Too many things had happened in the span of 5 months, especially when Erbian had disappeared and there had been no news of him at all during these 5 months. The central city, which was originally the capital that Erbian had built, was now covered in the flames of war. Countless black figures flew to and fro in the sky, releasing black, deathly light. They tore the land apart, smashed buildings, and killed all those who resisted. The densely packed black figures were like locusts, destroying the city crazily. These figures were all black human figures, and they were encompassed by a stretch of pitch-black darkness. They were like the souls of the dead that were spoken in legends. Occasionally, streams of black deathly light would shoot out from these souls of the dead, destroying the streets and buildings. Occasionally, a few souls of the dead would swoop down, grab up human warriors amidst the intense gunfire, and toss them into the sky. That warrior would then be instantly dismembered and engulfed by the souls of the dead in the sky. At the spot where the souls of the dead were the most concentrated, a huge black whale floated in midair. Streams of black aura encompassed the entire whale, and this whale's length exceeded 200 meters. It had a gigantic physique. On the whale's back, Grade was seated on the throne, smiling as he looked at the city that was gradually being occupied by the flames of war. I can sense it. My little cuties. They're over there. Grade licked his lips, and the greed in his eyes grew increasingly intense. The past 5 months could be said to be the happiest days of his life. If it could be said that he was still worried that Erbian might return at any moment in the first month, then after he engulfed over 10 of the army's warriors, he went all out. Without Erbian's suppression, without the 1-3 agreement, and without the 13 armies' balance, Feng Xingjian no longer had any reservations. Moreover, eating one person was eating 100 people was also eating. In any case, he had already started, so why would he care about Erbian coming back? 5 months passed by, as Feng Xingjian continued to engulf the warriors from the various armies, including the Green Army's commander, Ming Wang, his battle prowess sword, and he became the strongest expert on Earth. After he had devoured the warriors from the various armies, the devouring undead, which he had been unable to control previously, had become even easier to control. He could now turn any life that he devoured into devouring undead, and these undead would receive a ring from the Black Army. They would fight for him forever until they died. With this ability, he could increase the number of warriors in the Black Army almost limitlessly. Therefore, relying on his extremely strong abilities and the great army formed from the souls he engulfed, Grade swept through the various armies, countries, and influences. There was no one who could stop him. At this moment, almost the entire land had been conquered by him. The remaining army leaders formed a resistance army and stood guard in the central city. A soul covered in rotten flesh that looked like a Stitch monster came up to Grade, knelt down on one knee, and said, "Master, do we need to launch an all-out attack? They're already running out of ammunition." This devouring undead was clearly the abomination overlord who had been in the Yellow Army previously. However, he had been engulfed by Grade and had become a member of the Army of the Dead. Hearing the abomination overlord's question, Grade smiled. "There's no rush. We'll talk about it after the commander's powers are depleted." His eyes were fixed on the city under his feet. The Gold Army's Edward, the Red Army's Akari Jushru, the Orange Army's Reverend Fahue, the White Army's Priest Longmai, and the Gray Army's Huihi. The last 5 commanders were in this city. Gray believed that after engulfing them, his powers would increase once again. He might even be able to surpass Urbian. It's the same as eating them. So what if Urbian comes back? I'll be the master of the entire world. Everything will be mine. Just then, an orange light soared into the sky. It was Reverend Fahue who had dashed up into the sky. Grade frowned. Again, amongst the remaining few commanders, the one Grade was most wary of was the Gold Army's commander Edward, and the one who was the most difficult to deal with was Fahue. This Orange Army's commander grasped the power of sacrifice. This allowed each of his suicidal attacks to not only be very powerful, but he could also be reborn. Grade let out a cold snort and tapped out with a finger. A black, deathly light cut across the sky and clashed against Fahue's orange light. It was as if several tins of nuclear missiles had exploded in the sky, and seething air currents exploded. However, they were all pushed down to the ground by Grade's powers. Not only were they unable to stop the Black Army's attacks, but they even caused a large number of casualties to the human troops on the ground. Edward, who was standing on the rooftop, frowned deeply. This guy seems to have gotten stronger again. Huihi, Priest Longmai, and the others also appeared worried. They kept on being pushed back under Grade's attacks. Right now, even Fahue's suicidal attacks were completely useless. How much longer could the central city's defenses hold on for? Seeing everyone's worry, Edward said calmly, "Hold on a little longer. Urbian will definitely come back." When they enter space to fight with their powers and speed, as well as the battlefield, there might be a time dilation effect. A few minutes for them might become a few years for us. That's why they haven't come back until now. As long as Urbian comes back, everything will be resolved. We just need to hold on a little longer. Just as Edward was encouraging everyone, Grade's expression suddenly stiffened, and a hint of confusion flashed in his eyes. However, he recovered the next moment and looked at the surroundings strangely, feeling that something seemed to have happened. Unbeknownst to him, in the depths of his heart and at the end of his consciousness, the sword seed that had taken root in his greedy heart trembled slightly, and a hint of consciousness slowly awakened. Has it ended? To think that the main body's powers have been completely depleted. Fang Xingjian opened his eyes slowly. The portion of martial will that he had hidden in the depths of Grade's heart had just received the news from the main body. This was also a backup plan that Fang Xingjian had left behind. With that, even if the main body's powers were wiped out, he would still be able to leave behind a portion of his clone's consciousness, allowing him to continue living. The worst situation would be if he failed in both the battle head-on and the battle of beliefs. If that happened, he would have to stay in this universe forever. However, after sensing the final information from the battlefield, Fang Xingjian revealed a hint of a smile. As expected, his foundation isn't right. The ring's energy comes from the demonic god, after all. It's given by the demonic god. Therefore, no matter how much it develops, it'll still be like a reflection in the water. Now, let me see how this body is, and if it could be used to help me recover my powers. Feng Xingjian's gaze flickered, and he saw the surrounding scene through Grade's eyes. Chapter 966. Feng Xingjian's heart sword path was an unrivaled demonic sword that used electromagnetic waves as the starting point and illusory arts as the surface to distort the emotions of living creatures. It used all sorts of desires as nourishment, toyed with people's hearts, and toppled all living things. Especially after coming to this universe and encountering the cultivation system of the 13 armies, which use one's temperament to push forth various powers and abilities, gave Feng Xingjian a great reference, allowing him to achieve another breakthrough in his heart sword path. Right now, his heart sword path could condense a sword seed. The sword seed was almost invisible and hard to detect. It could also take root in one's heart, using one's desires and emotions as nourishment to continue to grow stronger. In the process of growing stronger, it could slowly distort one's temperament. The entire process tended to be a silent and unnoticeable process. It was just like how Urbian's righteous heart had been broken. It had started to change bit by bit from the start of the battle. Another example would be the current grade. Feng Xingjian had also planted a sword seed in him unknowingly, using Grade's greedy desires as nourishment. Simultaneously, Grade continued to guide and stimulate him in the dark, allowing him to sweep through earth and engulf the warriors from the various armies. However, right now, Feng Xingjian had awakened from a sword seed. This meant that the power he had used to fight against Urbian had been completely depleted. All that was left was the little bit of power and martial will in the sword seed. Feng Xingjian's sword formation, sword weapon, and sword realm had been shattered, and his sword arts had condensed into a new sword realm. Outside, there was the sword realm to fight and kill, while inside, there was the heart sword path to control the world. He also had a martial will of over 8,000 points and could be said to be extremely powerful. Right now, he was only left with a little bit of power in the sword seed. It could be said that his powers had reached the lowest point ever since he came to this universe. Therefore, through a series of observations, he gathered information from the outside world. Grade is currently already the strongest on Earth. To think that he managed to engulf so many warriors within a few months and even got the absolute upper hand. The potential of the Black Ring's energy might not be that much lower than the Silver Ring's. With Feng Xingjian's intelligence, after listening to the conversations and reports of some of the Black Warriors outside, he immediately understood the many things that had happened on Earth over the past few months. Just as Feng Xingjian was sensing the situation in the outside world, Grade took advantage of Fa Hui's rebirth to lead the Black Army and kill their way into the central city. Wherever they passed by, there would be a trail of broken limbs and remains. Black, deathly light came gushing forth like a tsunami, crushing the various countries. Regardless of whether it was machine guns, rockets, tanks, or fighter jets, none of them could effectively fight against the black spirits of the undead. Meanwhile, the black energy they released from their rings was often invincible and could easily tear through steel, cement, and steel. Seeing that the Black Army was advancing triumphantly, Edward and the others could no longer sit still. 4 light pillars soared into the sky, blocking the Black Army's path. A myriad of souls were instantly torn apart, and the violent energies from the rings were like surges of galactic storms. They radiated out in all directions, killing all of the Black Army souls. Encompassed in the golden light, Edward bellowed coldly, "Grade, are you crazy? Aren't you afraid that Urbian will come back?" "Huh?" Grade laughed out loud. He stood up abruptly from the huge whale throne, and in that instant, a myriad of black auras soared into the sky. It was as if countless huge heavenly demons had descended from the sky, and overwhelming demonic auras gushed forth. The entire central city seemed to be trembling because of this. So what if Urbian comes back? With my current strength, he can forget about taking me down even if he comes back. Saying this, Grade looked at Edward and the others with a greedy expression. Moreover, after I engulf you guys, even Urbian won't be a match for me. As he spoke, Urbian struck out with his palm, and streams of black aura circled together, turning into a huge hand that struck out toward the four commanders. Edward and the others retaliated as well. Streams of light turned into huge cannons, mountain ranges, meteors, and sabers and swords, attacking toward Urbian's huge hand. However, Urbian's palm trembled, and his entire palm was filled with a chaotic color. The huge palm seemed to have suddenly become 1,000 times heavier, and bursts of incomparably valiant power erupted. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The atmosphere trembled, the mountain ranges were torn apart, and meteors were incinerated. Wherever the gigantic palm passed by, the attacks from Edward and the others were all crushed. Soaring air explosions tore through the clouds and shattered countless tall buildings. Edward and the others let out muffled groans and retreated several thousand meters. They had all been injured by Urbian's palm strike. Seeing this scene, Urbian sneered and shouted, "Still not surrendering?" A loud bellow seemed to shake the world, directly knocking out tens of thousands of mortal soldiers. When the undead army in the surroundings heard that, they also shouted loudly. The layers of voices eventually merged into one, and it was as if there was only one voice left in the world. Surrender, 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 surrender. Sensing Grade's prowess, the countenances of Edward and the others turned even more grim. To think that he can already make use of the powers of the other armies. Hui's countenance was extremely grim. To think that this guy's earlier attack borrowed the powers of the rings from the other armies. How did he do it? To think that the Black Army still has such an ability? Priest Longmai and Akaryu Jushru also exchanged a look of great astonishment. They looked at the densely packed, undead army above their heads and felt that the future was uncertain. Just then, a stream of orange light pierced through the world. Monk Fahue had been reborn and returned. Seeing that Fahue had returned, Grade let out a cold laugh and sat back down. With a wave of his hand, he sent out a myriad of undead to continue the encirclement. This was also his strategy for laying siege to the city this time around. He wanted to use the undead army to deplete the other party's powers and force Fahue to self-destruct. After Fahue self-destructed, he would personally make a move to deplete the powers of Edward and the others' rings. In this manner, he would not need to take on Fahue's self-destruct attacks personally and would be able to deplete the other party's powers. I'll wait until tonight. If I go all out before their rings' energies recover, I'll have to kill at least one of them. Grade narrowed his eyes, having complete control over the entire battlefield. However, at the next moment, his gaze narrowed slightly as he looked at the 5 commanders before him. A hint of greed appeared in his mind uncontrollably. This trace of greedy desire was like a spark that suddenly fell into a patch of dry grass, and in an instant, it burned fiercely. I'm really too careful. Even if I go all out now, I have a 60% chance of taking all of them down. Why do I need to deplete their powers and wait until nightfall? Moreover, Urbian might really come back. I should eat them up as soon as possible. All sorts of desires rose uncontrollably in Grade's heart. Even Grade himself did not seem to have realized it. He started to find excuses for himself to convince himself. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.